Welcome everybody to the Chess Lab, welcome to, and I didn't do the full screen, here we go. Welcome everybody to the Chess Lab and welcome to the How to Reassess Your Chess episode 6. I had to read the title because I'm thinking about so many things, my mind is scattered all over the place. Let's go. So we were doing this chapter, we were talking about the knights, so let's keep going. Yeah. I think we went over this thing. Yeah. Now test 4. No. I didn't look at the move. You guys didn't look at the move either. So this is an awesome start. I could have started the video, but guess what? Let's just keep going. Let's try to finish these puzzles here. Okay, so 1600 from 1800. Let's look at this position. 3, 4, 2 knights, 2 bishops. Materials equal. We have an advantage in space on the queen side, and that's it. We have control over the d5 square and the f5 square. And we also have control, and black has control over d4 square. We have some pressure on e5, and that's live. Now, we may have the critical pawn push a4, a5, because we have more space there. There is an open d file, something that I should start to notice, because open files are important. So, we may play rook a to d1, or rook f to d1, since we want perhaps to reserve our rook for the a4, a5 thrust. However, this is about knights, which shouldn't be the way you think. The way you should think in this position is, let's compare pieces. We have a light square bishop, which is okay. We have queen, which is okay. We have knight on f3, which is okay. Bishop on b2, which is okay. The rooks are whatever. And they're basically the same. So we either play rook f to d1, but what's our worst piece in this position if we have one really bad piece? Well, the knight on d2. The knight on d2 is protecting the pawn on e4. However, we would love to play knight to b1, knight to c3, knight d5, right? However, if we play knight b1, we lose the pawn over to e4, right? Knight b1, bishop takes e4, attacking the queen, and the position basically collapses. However, what if we defend the pawn first? So, what if we play a move like rook f to e1, because again we want the other rook to the a file, and then we play knight f1, knight e3, knight d5, or knight b1, knight c3, knight d5, right? Because after knight e1, knight f3, the pawn on e4 is not protected. So my move would be rook e1, quite frankly. There is the other move, knight h4, with the idea to go to f5, but after g6, I mean, I don't know, maybe, but I don't know. So I'll just go rook e1. Now, I don't remember this exercise because I already solved this puzzle. Well, not solved it, but I already tried to solve it in the past, but I really can't remember what the move is. Rook e1 doesn't look crazy, but let's see. I'm going to play rook e1. If it's wrong, it's wrong. It's correct. Now, a6, trying to break down this position. I don't know what do we want to do. Perhaps we simply want to play a4. Because they're threatening takes, and then this is a pass pawn. We could play knight c4. But the problem is if they take, they can push. Gaining the c5 square, knight c5 attacking this guy, so that would be pretty terrible. So I think we have to play a4. So if they take, we take with the a pawn, so that they don't have c4. Okay, they are trying to trade like rooks on the file. What if we do this, and then this? I think it's fine. I think we can just go for it. Okay, this is an alternative, so perhaps they want rook takes a8 first. Well, let's see. Okay, so let's go here, and that's solved. That's great. Okay, so let's exit. This was solved very nicely. Test 4, let's see it. Sorry, that's the explanation. Test 4, let's go. So the move is rook f to e1, defending e4 and thus freeing the d2 knight of guard duty. In the actual game, white played the nonsensical bishop c3, taking the c3 square away from the knight, because again, our goal was to go knight b1, knight c3. The continuation, which doesn't boast ideal play for either side, was rook f to d8, taking the open file, rook f to d1, doing the same, knight e8, trying to something, I guess, knight f1, finally noticing that d5 will make a nice home for a knight. Fortunately, in this case, all roads lead to Rome, so f6, knight e3, because since the knight is no longer on f6, you can play this maneuver without hanging e4. And after queen back to b8, knight d5, white's doing alright, I mean, it's doing well. So bishop f8, rook to d2, even though bishop h3 was very strong, yeah. This is a move I also played in a game of mine, where there was this knight and this rook, and it was very good. So rook d2, now knight to c7, rook a to d1, which looks like the most normal move in the world, literally ignoring black's idea. If you refuse to take your opponent's plans into consideration, you're doomed yourself to a lot of pain. Instead of rook a d1, simply bishop h3, stopping knight to e6 in his tracks, would have given white a very large advantage. But now knight e6, looking at the d4 square, and after knight h4, knight e4, and though white has a slight plus, black's chances have significantly improved, of course. Also note how useless white's idea of doubling the d file has turned out to be. Very nice. So rook f to e1, rook f to e1, a6, and we saw the solution here, followed by knight c3, knight d5 with a solid plus. Okay. So now test 4, let's see what it says. This is from the game Girl Brain, Brooklyn, ICC 2007. Brooklyn, I think, is the username of the black player on the internet chess server. White wasn't sure what to do and accordingly played a move, bishop c3 mistake, that actually hindered her proper plan. The key here is being aware of the holes on d4 and d5. Black needs to get a knight to d4 as quickly as possible, and white needs to get a knight to d5 at warp speed. Once you realize where your pieces should go, it becomes easy to find the correct moves to make it happen. However, if you are just mindlessly calculating moves with no real plan in mind, then you'll usually play something that has little or nothing to do with the needs of the position. I have to reread this, sorry, but I'm very distracted. Again, my mind is spinning around. So once you realize where your pieces should go, it becomes easy to find the correct moves to make it happen. However, if you are just mindlessly calculating moves with no real plan in mind, then you'll usually play something that has little or nothing to do with it. Okay. In the diagram, white will love to play knight from d2 to b1 to c3 to d5. However, moving the d2 knight would result in the loss of the e-pawn, thus defend the pawn, explaining the rating spread. I would hope that players in the 1400 to 1800 range will recognize a huge hole and try to get their knight to it. However, in this case e4 is weak, so this process calls for some patience. As a result, I upped the difficulty level to 1600. Okay. Makes sense. Now it's funny because in this position here, if you don't think about Silman's considerations and if you don't evaluate the position, a move like rook e1 looks pretty bad, right? Because you may notice the open file, which again, I struggle to notice open files for some reasons, but I would assume a lot of players don't have really a problem with it, and you would just play something like rook f to d1 perhaps. But again, here there is a little bit deeper concept. Okay, let's now go to test 5, level 1900 to 2200, so this is tough. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So this is same number of pawns, two knights, bishops. Okay, so material is equal. We have more space in the center, right? And even on the queen's, sorry, on the king side. Black has more space on the queen side. Okay, so how are our pieces doing? How they doing? How they doing? Well, they are kind of doing whatever they're doing. Our bishop on h4 is pressuring f6 perhaps, but doesn't look amazing, but it's not terrible either. Our knight on c4 is a great piece. He's pressuring d6, which is really nice. And the knight on h5 is really not doing much. So that's very dubious. The queen on c7 is she has a very defensive purpose, it seems, so it's not really too much enticing. I don't know what enticing means, but it feels like a cool thing to say. What else? We notice a weakness on a6, a weakness on b2, a weakness on e4, a weakness on d6, and a weakness on f6. We could play rook to a1 to try to attack the a6 pawn. Easy on a6, okay, because I'm closing my eyes now, so let's try to do it blindfolded. So we can play rook to a1. They can play rook a8 to defend the pawn, because if they move the queen or the rook to b6, I think they're losing it from our knight on c4. And so rook a1, rook a8, then we can push the central pawn to, I think, is it the e pawn? I think it's the d pawn, d5. Okay, I have to see. No, d5 is already there. e5, yeah, we can play e4, e5 perhaps. Takes, and then the knight to e4 to really attack d6. I don't know, it's complicated. So I'm gonna go rook a1 to attack a6, because you may say, okay, but what about the knights? Well, listen, I understand your knight thinking, but here the knights can't really do much. Perhaps bishop to g3 to try to play for f5, maybe, to attack this guy, but then they have knight e5. That's huge. So playing f5 is really not something that I'm looking forward to, quite frankly. So I'm just gonna go rook a1. It's wrong. Okay, fine. Knight b1. Whoa, that's crazy. So what's the idea of knight b1? I guess the idea is to go to... here, here, here. Okay, they go to b6. They go to b6. I think I can still go here. I admit I'm not understanding this position a little bit, but I mean quite at all, I should say. You know? I'm gonna try. Takes, I'm gonna take with the knight. Okay, the knight here goes back, trying to control this square once more. But now I feel like attacking this pawn has some merit to it. And perhaps even playing bishop here and bishop here to improve the position of the bishop. So the queen kind of defends everything. Here, of course, there is some pressure to this pawn. I think I kind of really want to do this. Because also, if here, it seems like it's okay. Yeah. Okay, now the puzzle continues, obviously, but... I will just take, personally. Oh, but then this pawn hangs. But then this guy falls. Perhaps I'm just gonna play rook e1. Yeah, rook e1 makes sense because you're playing towards this push. Now they go back defending. And now we may even go knight a5, knight to c6. f5, giving up the e5 square. Yeah, I'm not understanding this at all. And keep in mind, I already saw this puzzle, believe it or not, but I'm not understanding this at all. But I guess now if you play knight e5, I can take with my knight, and if you take with the d pawn, I have a passed pawn. If you take with the e pawn, the kingside get crushed. If you take with the rook, you lose your rook. So, and then the problem remains. So okay, let's keep going. f5. Okay, the puzzle continues with g5, and now what? Now I really would love to go to a6. That's alternative, so it's not terrible, but perhaps there's better. I could try to go here and here to attack this guy, but it feels so weird. I could go here to attack this guy, let's try. This is also an alternative. I could also double the rooks up to put pressure on this pawn. So rook a4, as you can see. I don't know why the others are wrong, but I'm just going. Let's finish the job. We can't play e5 anymore, so we'd rather double up here. The king goes here. Are there tactics or anything like that? Sorry guys, but I'm really tired. I'm gonna go with knight a5 and see what happens. Wrong. Queen b1, oh, to triple up on the a file. Perhaps even rook a3. Okay, that was crazy, so let's exit and let's try to study this. Yeah, this was very difficult. And what matters is that to find the first move I fail completely. So knight b1, I don't even remember what the idea of knight b1 is. Knight b6, black would love to play f5, but fails to e takes, rook takes, bishop takes, knight takes, bishop b4, interesting. So knight b6, knight b2, mission accomplished. White retains an octopus on c4. And why is the octopus so strong on that square? A glance shows that its many arms reach in all directions. Of course, it ties internal squares on a3, d2, and e3. I have to sit in a worse position, meaning less comfortably, meaning I stay awake. I need to get a little bit colder so that I stay awake. Guys, sorry, but when I have the first shift, I wake up at 4. I'm very tired in the afternoon. I have to really push. And, you may say, oh, don't push so hard, but you can't improve if you don't push, So, it's my choice, It's fine. So, this actually had me stay a little bit more awake. So a glance shows that its many arms reach in all directions. Of course, it ties internal squares on a3, b2, d3, d2, e3, but that's to be expected. It turns into a superhero when one realizes that it defends the pawn on b2, eyes a5, which can be a jumping off point to c6 via knight c4, a5, c6. This also means that when white starts attacking the a pawn with rook a1, black won't want to push the pawn to a5. Since that will walk right into the knight's influence, that's crazy. But did I do the evaluation of the position in this puzzle? I don't even know that. Like a6 is a weakness? Yeah, I said a6 is a weakness. Oh, so the idea here of this puzzle is not to reach a square. So the idea of this puzzle is that in this position you need to understand that your knight is so strong, and d5 is the wrong idea. You don't play knight b1 to go to f3 with the knight. That's wrong idea, perhaps. You don't want to play d5. Yeah, you don't want to play d5. You don't want to play d5. That's wrong idea. The idea is to keep the knight on c4. They want to trade it with knight b6, and if you move it well, you don't have a beautiful knight anymore, and probably c4 is good. But so you wanna keep that knight installed on the c4 square, but they want to trade it, right? So the way you deal with this is by trying to support your knight with another knight to substitute it. So knight b1 to play knight to d2. There are no really other moves to achieve that, I guess. So knight b1 has this idea, and if we look at the position like that, we understand the whole things. This only helps white. You can play queen b8, but now this. Rook takes b2, the rook b1. Seriously annoying because after the trade, of course, the knight spin, the black's knight spin. If you play f5, e5, now it works. It's even worse. Knight f7 would have done more to keep white's advantage within acceptable limits. Of course, very difficult move to make, but now knight takes. Knight f7 only now, rook a1. Queen b7 defending the a6 pawn. Things get out of hand after this. He had to try queen e7, then rook f to e1, takes the e1 square away from white's bishop. Then queen d7 followed by queen b5. So if you take on a6, there is queen b5. Keeps black in the game. Yeah, but these were some difficult, extremely difficult moves to see. You have to see the whole sequence with the numerous tactical tricks. So bishop e1 attacks the guy. Rook b5, bishop c3. Beautiful repositioning of the bishop. These are multiple puzzles in one. The way you solve this puzzle is like every position you stop and you redo the evaluation because it deserves it. But I'm tired, so I'm just keep going. Again, I have this controversial, perhaps, philosophy of perfection is the killer of improvement. And today I'm tired, so this is just how it's gonna be. Like, that's just how it is. Oh, but you could have, yeah, this is the present. So Black's now strategically lost. He has no active play, his pieces are passive, his d6 pawn is in need of constant defense, and his a6 pawn is ultimately a goner. Worship the octopus on c4. Queen b7, and now f5, crazy move, but we saw the positives. g5, rook a4, supports the knight. Doesn't support the knight, sorry, prepares to stack on the a file. So rook a8, rook a to e1, and now this beautiful idea of attacking that pawn. It's all over. The rest doesn't need any comment. After queen a2, there is queen e7 trying to counter on e2, sorry, on e4. But after take, if you take and I take, then b5 is hanging, the rook on b5 is hanging. So they tried this, but now rook to a8. If you take on e4, I guess I take and then play queen a8, I don't know. I don't know though. Oh no, sorry, after rook a8, if they take on e4, I can take on d8 and then take on d6 with a fork, yeah. So rook b to b8, takes, queen b7. If you take on e4, here I take your knight on f7 and then I fork on d6 and I end up a piece, so they have to move. Now if you take the knight, if they take with a king, you take on d6, but they take with a queen and you resign. So queen to c7, if you take the pawn on e4, I win the rook on b8. Rook d8, now infiltration, and if you move the knight you get mated, if you move the queen or the king you lose the knight, if you move the rook you lose the rook or the pawn on d6. So black is in desperation mode here, even trading the rooks is winning, that's what black calculates here. Bishop takes. In this position, how do you take back? Well, you have to calculate what happened after bishop takes. After bishop takes, you're gonna have a big imbalance, which is the weakness of their pawns, and you're gonna win. You're gonna win. f takes, and I think that rook to e6 may be winning, but I'm not sure, and Silman thought perhaps no, and he simply went back to b6. Going to b6 is a genius move because it prepares rook b6, which is just another way to attack that d6 pawn like rook e6 would have had, but this time the pawn on b2 is also defended. My mind is literally going out. King g1, of course Sirius tried to move over the king. And now you have some tactics, finally check. And it's over, you can compete with 1, 2, 3, 5 pawns against 2 more active pieces, it's completely done. So, this position occurred in the game Silman Booth, Los Angeles 1987. Both sides have a vulnerable queenside pawns. a6 for black and b2 for white. a6 for black and b2 for white. Yeah. But white's more active minor piece is an advantage in central space, which leaves black constantly worrying about both f4, f5 and e4, e5 advances, gives him better chances. At the moment, the pride of white's position is the c4 knight, but black would have loved to exchange it for his far less imposing beast on d7, via knight b6. When you look at the position in this fashion, white's first move shouldn't come as a surprise. Explaining, which is again a knight b1, explaining the rating spread, though you might be getting used to knight retreats by now, the solution is obscured by central possibilities and chances to create pressure against a6. Yeah, I think my move was rook a1 or something. Also, white already has a knight on c4, so why bring the other knight to bear on the same square? Clearly there's a lot more going on than a simple knight retreat, and that's what makes it an advanced problem. And I agree, completely got me, but that's beautiful because the pattern here of supporting a knight which is already on a great square is key. It just opens my mind to an infinite another amount of possibilities. I didn't look at the solution again, I realized in time, but it's annoying that every time I misclick. Not that I misclick, I really click wrongly, but that's the way you say it, I guess. Level 1900, 2200, okay, no big deal, light work, let's keep going. So, some materials equal, black has the bishop pair, but we have a beautiful knight. So unfortunately the solution to this puzzle is so unique that I must admit I remember it. I remember the solution, the solution move. Let's try to find it on our own. They have the bishop pair, which is a very strong asset. We have a pawn majority on the king side, they have a pawn minority on the queen side. They have a couple of weak pieces. They have this rook who's weak and weirdly positioned because she will need this other rook to go here. On the other hand, this bishop is also only defended by a piece. The a8 rook technically was also tender, but it's like so far away that it doesn't matter as of right now. And the b pawns, I don't even know what I'm saying. Like, I'm thinking about things that are not. I don't even know if I'm talking about the position. That's how tired I am. I'm literally. I think that after this puzzle, I'm gonna take a break. I'm gonna try to sleep for like 20-30 minutes to reset, and then I'm gonna come back and actually continue because this is terrible condition. Like, I have no problem enduring tiredness. The problem is that I am literally not functioning, so that's a little bit too much. Anyways, so is there a move that can perhaps take the bishop pair and perhaps start to use the majority? Well, there is a move which is crazy move, knight c8. I remember this being the solution to this puzzle. Silman was black and he actually lost. So this is the solution. Oh yeah, of course here, that's crazy. No, but this is me being tired. Sorry guys. So sometimes if you do a mistake that is not related to understanding, You don't want chessable to memorize it as a mistake, because that would actually be bad for you. Because if I come back tomorrow and I don't remember exactly what happened today, which is very likely since the condition I'm in, I see my mistakes, and then I see the 2 mistakes that I missed the maneuver, and then I see this mistake, and I'm like, oh, so I missed the maneuver. And I look at this puzzle and I'm like, wait, but I know that knight c8 is the solution. Yeah, but of course, after rook takes, if you just take back with the rook, you lose your piece. So you have to interpose this. This is tactical thing. And so you click on another line, another random line, and then you click back, right? So chessable forgets basically that you made the mistake, and it doesn't get counted in. If you're not used to this, you probably think, oh, that's cheating, you made a mistake. But no. It's actually bad if you let chessable memorize this as a mistake, because it has nothing to do with the understanding of the position. So it's just me being super tired and I need to sleep, you know. If I make a mistake like here, when it comes to understanding here, that's a different story. Then I keep it. But if it's just stupid tactics, then it's whatever. So here I remember that the simple bishop here, which wins a pawn, doesn't cut it for some reason. I don't know why. I think the solution is like g4 or something. So yeah, that's just crazy. And here perhaps you trade and you win on b7, and then you will win the endgame, unless I'm insane, which I could be. Perhaps you even play f5 first. f5 first makes a lot of sense, because otherwise they would have this and this, which is annoying. And now I guess I take here. Yeah, I remember this puzzle, believe it or not. I remember this puzzle. So now let's look at it. And of course the whole justification of knight c8 is that you have knight takes c7 with check. So knight c8, Benjamin, in his excellent book American Grandmaster, writes, "This is not an obvious square for the knight, but it came to me when I saw knight f5, bishop takes f5 doesn't work. I heard Silman mother cheap bastard. I'll assume he meant this in a gracious way. Jeremy and I have since been good friends for years. I don't remember making that rude mother. Benjamin couldn't have been more than 2 years old at the time of this game, so the realization that I was about to lose to a fetus undoubtedly prompted a bout of serious angst. But I can imagine my horror at seeing the knight plonk itself down on its 8th rank and instantly turn a position that I'd long deemed to have 2 possible results, a win for me or a draw, into something far less palatable. As mentioned earlier, knights usually don't tread on this rank, but when they do make an effective jump to the 8th, there are often tactics at work. In this case, the knight makes use of the single most common tactical building block, an undefended piece, the d7 rook being the culprit here. Explaining the rating spread. This is very advanced puzzles, guys, like... don't worry too much about it. Don't worry too much about it. To master something like how to reassess your chess, you have to read the whole book first, then practice, meaning you try to evaluate and find things over the board, then read it again, do it again, read it again like 10 times, but with like conscious effort. So we are just reading it for the first time, and we are just like 1 or 2 chapters in. So it's, if you find this complicated, it's normal. I didn't find it the first time that I made these puzzles. I would have never found knight c8. Now when I saw knight c8 for the first time as a solution, it struck me, and so I can remember it forever. But I didn't find it the first time I tried to solve this puzzle. So, explaining the rating spread. A bit mean of me, since I'm sure most of you were looking for positional ways to use the white knight. Instead, I tossed in a tactic, and a surprising one at that, since 8th rank jumps are rare. The calculation itself isn't hard, but noticing it is, yeah. So rook takes, knight takes e7, of course. Here I was just tired, of course you have to take the bishop, otherwise you lose a piece. So knight takes, king f7, rook takes d1, and here g4, again, I also remember this, I would have never played g4 ever. The first time I solved, I tried bishop takes g7, it's like wrong. While knight c8 on move 24 shows a good tactical eye. This pawn move demonstrates excellent technique and a calm desire to milk every last drop of juicy goodness from the position. I had viewed knight c8 as a lucky find, and it was only after the high-class g4 that I realized my young opponent was destined for great things. Because if you play bishop takes g7, which is what I would have done, then there is bishop h5, g4, bishop takes g4, which is just crazy, and after king takes g4, rook to g7. This is wild shit. This is wild shit. Okay, the tempting bishop d6 check, king f6, bishop takes c5 allows bishop e8, which is another wild thing. When Benjamin says black suffers no further damage with only a one pawn majority, which would be this, white will be hard pressed to win. And also you have this check, opposite color bishop, fantastic bishop on c6, truly magnificent. It's gonna be difficult, so g4 is just best. Rook d8 takes f5, bishop takes, and white went on to win. So this is absolutely phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. Now we are gonna see it from here. That's really nice. No wonder I remember that. Like, that's really nice. Positionally as well after g5 or g4, whatever that was. So black's two bishop give him a comfortable advantage. Unfortunately, black gets lazy and allows white to slowly but surely steer the game into drawish equality. So knight takes, c5, knight c2, queen takes, rook takes, bishop e6, knight to c3, rook f to d8, knight e3, f6. So white gets active, mobilizes his majority, defends the knight, attacks the bishop, bishop goes back. Of course, if black had seen white's reply, he would have played bishop takes d6 with a quick draw in view, but of course, you know, he was trying to, rightfully so, play for a win, but knight c8 is crazy. And here there is basically what we already saw. We already read through these comments, so I'm not gonna spend the time to read through it again. Test 7, test 8, test 9, and then it's the end. I'm gonna take a break. I'm gonna sleep for like 20 minutes or something, and then I'm gonna come back. For you guys, it's just gonna be a second, so don't worry too much about it. But I need a little bit of sleep because I'm just... While I was looking at the board and saying like the pieces things, I was thinking about things that were not chess. And at some point I'm like, what was I saying? I hope I didn't say anything crazy. Oh well. So see you guys in a second. Okay guys, so I'm back. I didn't just spend 20 minutes sleeping. I just slept until the morning, and then I went to work, and now it's the afternoon after. So yeah, we're just gonna keep going from where I left. I'm gonna keep it all in one episode so that is easier for my organization and also your organization, quite frankly. We were solving the tests, unless I'm mistaken. Let's solve it. I feel much better today, obviously, of course. Let's go. So let's evaluate this position. 3, 4, 3, 4, 2 knights, 2 bishops. So materials equal. Let's compare the pieces. So I'm trying to find a way to always evaluate the position the same way, right? But it has to be a way that I like. And I'm putting down many things. So I'm gonna go with one material. That's the only thing I'm sure about. And then 2. Compare pieces. But perhaps first I want to do the pawn structure. Okay, so 2. Pawn structure. I know it's very materialistic, but I like it this way. I like to have the very materialistic stuff down first. So what is the pawn structure? Symmetrical, and there is an open file. Open files, if you think about it, are pawn structure related, because if there are no 2 pawns on a file, that's an open file. So in the definition of open file, there is pawn structure. So there's that. Weaknesses. So I'm gonna write it down. So pawn structure, I'm gonna go symmetrical, slash non-symmetrical. Then I'm gonna go no, open files though, open files is but the thing is, that's what I noticed, but here I notice it because it's in the middle. Do I go with open files? No, I'm gonna go weaknesses. Weaknesses. Are there weak pawns? Not that I can't identify. Not that I can identify. Okay. 3. Open files / weak squares. So that's another whole point. However, this is like related to pawn structure. So when you're gonna think in an actual game, it's gonna flow. Hopefully, that's the goal. The goal is that this flows and is not artificially constructed. I mean, it is artificially constructed, but I don't want it to feel artificially constructed. I should stand up a little bit more. Today I did. Oh, sorry guys, you can't. Oh, every time I do a test, you don't see it properly. No, that's catastrophical. I'm sorry. So up until now, the video was terrible. Wow, I just realized it now. Well, sorry. That was it. One more good reason to just buy the actual book or course. Sorry. Okay. Anyways, so weak squares, there is b6, which is a weak square because both pawns are already moved. There is d6, which is also a weak square. f6 and g6 are potentially weak, but they're nicely guarded by the bishop. So I will say b6 and d6 are the weak squares, clearly. Right. What else? Well, in white, what are the weak squares? You can't really talk about weak squares like b6 and d6, because if you consider like these 3 squares that I've highlighted, you can always play c3 or g3. Of course, if you play these 2 moves, other squares are becoming weak all of a sudden, but that's a little bit different. Like, this is truly forever weak. So, how to go about it? Well, immediately it's crazy because already I'm thinking about this, which is crazy, right? But it makes sense. But before that, let's look about open files. So we have this file here. So d6 could be a really critical square. So we have b6 and d6 and the d file. So far we control the d file. Okay, so space. I didn't talk about space. At this point, for space. So we don't have a space advantage. We don't because you may say, what about this pawn? Yeah, but they have the same, right? Space advantage will mean if their pawn was back, then we would have a space advantage in the center, because we're controlling our 5th rank, but they're also controlling our 5th rank, and the other 2 squares as well. So, and here the same, we are controlling this our 5th rank, right? This is our 5th rank, but this is their 5th rank. Like, this is their 5th rank, this is our 5th rank. So it's the same. If anything here, they have some space. They really don't, but you know what I mean. So no, space is the same. Space is equal. Okay, now finally, I need a new piece of paper. I need a piece of paper. Do you have a piece of paper? I need some paper to make a payment. Next Eminem right there. I'm white, so I can be. Anyway. So out of pocket. Okay, so space. Now finally, let's talk about the pieces. Minor pieces. Or should I start with the heavy pieces? I don't know. Minor pieces. Perhaps I should start with the minor pieces. So, first, look for major imbalances. For instance, Sir Winston Churchill looked for major imbalances. For example, bishop pair, knight versus bishop, and that's pretty much it. Then, if these are not present, look for relative imbalances. I don't want to call them minor imbalances because that could be important, but look for relative imbalances. For example, knight versus knight, bishop versus bishop, etc. And also bishop pair, knight versus bishop, there is also opposite colored bishops. Okay, that's another major imbalance. So here in this case, we're already excluding bishop pair and stuff like that, but, and of course when I say this, you may want to create the imbalance of the bishop pair, right? But again, that's more, oh, this is so complex. Oh, this is so complex. I slept 10 hours last night, and I feel it. I had a super good train at the gym, and I feel like I'm thinking like geniusly right now. Like I'm actually thinking. I'm not used to it, sorry, so I'm surprised. It's just, bro, sleeping is cool, and you may say, why don't you always sleep 10 hours then? You didn't ask this question because you yourself know the answer. It's like, if you sleep 10 hours every day, you don't have time to do nothing every day, so there's the trade-off. Unfortunately, admittedly, I probably did it subliminally. Okay, this was actually Eminem. So, anyways. MMNs. So, there is also Queen C4. Oh, I think the solution of this puzzle is Queen C4. But because I remember it, not because I know it. That's a little bit of a pity. But still. I don't know why though. Maybe you want to reach this square, C5. Is C5 weak? I don't know. Well, after this, if you push this pawn, then you can win it. Anyways, see, I'm losing myself. So here we said material is equal, pawn structure is equal, open files, there is an open D file, so far we control it. But again, I don't know if it's important. We are just observing, so there is one open file. Then space. Nobody has advantage in space. But see, I'm thinking about this. If you think about it, if I say material, you can assess whether or not this is equal. If you say pawn structure, you can assess whether or not this is equal. But if you say open files or weak squares, that's just an observation. Space, you can assess whether or not this is equal. So I'm gonna keep open file. I'm gonna put open files weak square after space. Actually, I'm gonna put it even after minor pieces. I'm gonna put it even after minor pieces. So minor pieces. The knight on c3 sucks. It doesn't suck, I shouldn't say this, because he's defending e4, he's defending a4, but that's not great. This is my alarm because I have to take the rice off the thing where you cook the rice. I don't know how to say it in English. But so I really have to go. But it doesn't have a future. Like, he's on a third rank, which is not bad, but it can't go to b5, it can't go to d5. The only good thing is that if you look at black's position, a break in a pawn break that they may have is b5. So I should also look at pawn breaks. Pawn breaks. Now you're probably thinking this is a lot of stuff. Well, that's very little compared to everything we're about to see. But imagine doing it every time. It becomes second nature at some point. So yeah, it's in the beginning. Again, remember, your brain is not used to it. In the beginning you struggle a lot. Then it's gonna become second nature. You do it instantly. I struggle to believe it myself, but I'm kind of trying to encourage myself. So yeah. So our knight is not terrible because one of their pawn breaks is b5 and our knight is helping into controlling that. So that's not terrible. It's really not. It's really not. Also, the c6 pawn kind of has to stay there. Because if it moves, we can play knight b5 and then jump to d6 or to c7. We can play knight d5. And we cannot play knight d5 and just have the d5 square. So c6 is immobile, the b pawn is immobile, so the c and b pawn are frozen. The a5 pawn is frozen. We can play b3, for example, and if we move the knight, we can play c3. So our pawn structure on the queen side is more mobile. f5 is another pawn break that they have, however, is not playable at the moment. Okay, now, let's go back to minor pieces. Look for major imbalances. There are none. Look for relative imbalances. So again, if we compare the knight on c3 with the knight on d7, the knight on d7 has the c5 square, right, which is better. However, it doesn't stand too well on d7. So an idea for black could be to play knight c5. Now, the other knight, the knight on f3. The knight on f3 is, again, applying some pressure on e5, so that's already slightly better than c3. And it can jump to g5. So the knight is not bad. It's not crazily good, but it's not bad either. Right? Now, what about the knight on f6? The knight on f6 is kind of like the knight on c3. But I will say that compared to the knight on f3, which is the knight we are comparing it to, is a little bit worse, maybe, because it can't jump to g4. It can go to h5 and then to f4 though, but a simple g3 would just kill it in its tracks. But maybe knight h5 is not that bad, so that knight on f6 may not be the worst piece ever. So knight h5, f5 can be an idea for them. I should go do the rise, but so we said knight here, that's one idea, and a second idea is, let me do it in red. Oh my goodness. It's just to highlight the ideas. Okay, knight h5 to f5, and then f5 with the pawn. So there is a move that stops both of these, right? Which again is queen c4, but the problem is I know queen c4 from heart because I remember it. Anyways, I'm gonna be back in a second. I have to take my rice off the oven. It's not the oven, I know, but I don't know, call it otherwise. You guys stay here, okay, and try to figure it out. And I'm quite sure the move is queen c4 because queen c4 also allows for knight e1, knight d3, knight c5, which improves tremendously the position of our knight on f3, like tremendously. Because to improve the knight on c3 is so hard, believe it or not. So here we are going for maximization of the other knight. But despite you know the position, keep going. Like compare the bishops, and really try your best to compare these bishops. And you may say, but I don't know what to say about these bishops. Just say something. Just talk. You have to develop this ability to talk, about chess. Like verbally explain what you see. You can very banal. If you really don't know what to say, just say, this dark square bishop is controlling two diagonals. Just say that. And maybe you start to think about this, which is probably ridiculous, but is better than nothing. Again, it's all about progress. You don't have to be perfect. You don't even have to be right. Again, we are not in school. Just think whatever. Think whatever. For example, this bishop here is very restricted. If you move this queen, already it gains one square. Does it matter? I don't know. But you're saying something. Okay, I'll be back in like 3 minutes. I needed this. we are back. So, you guys, it's your analysis, hopefully. So the bishops, let's compare the bishops. The bishop on e2 is stuck behind our pieces, is not optimal, right? But their bishop on c8 is also stuck behind their knight. So an important plan for them is to really move that knight, so to activate also their bishop. When it comes to our bishop on e3, I would say that is better than their bishop on g7. Right? When it comes to the rooks, because of the bishop on... Actually, our bishop on e2 is better. And this is thanks to Grandmaster Raven's concept of harmony. Our bishop on e2 is not better than the bishop on c8 on e2. Meaning the fact that our bishop is on e2 doesn't make it better than the bishop on c8. However, the fact that our bishop on e2 is not on d1, a negative, makes it better than the bishop on c8. Because our rooks are connected. So that's a little bit better. That's crazy if you think about it. It is so advanced. How did I even thought about that? That's crazy. Let's go. Pat on the shoulder, guys. Let's go. Do a pat on the shoulders yourself, because why not? Okay, so... the bishop on g7, again, our bishop on e3 is good. The rooks are connected. They're a little bit better just because of that, quite frankly. Also, this rook can do this, to target this weakness, for example. Their rook cannot do that, because they will just lose it. They will lose an exchange, I mean. So, there's that. Absolutely, there's that. This other rook can join to the d file. The rook can do the same, however, it would be hanging, pinning this knight. So that's not optimal. So I would say our position is perhaps slightly better, I would say. Okay, now finally we can talk about king safety. They have the fianchetto structure, but they have the fianchetto bishop, so it's fine. They have the knight f6. The classic, as Nakamura would say, the classic fossil on f6. We have the English pinky up. We have the pinky up pawn structure, right? We are drinking with the pinky up, you know, because there is h3. Otherwise, that would be like perfect. I don't know how to say it otherwise. Or susceptible to bank rank. We have the knight, the typical classic fossil knight on f3, like they have on f6, so king safety is fine. King safety is fine for both, but our pieces are slightly better coordinated. And it's crazy that, as you can see, I said this sentence that sometimes you hear from masters and grandmasters, like, our pieces are slightly better coordinated. But now we understand why. And guys, it's true that I remember queen c4 as the move, but everything else I said by myself. I'm quite happy of this evaluation, quite frankly. I feel like my evaluation skills is improving. That's crazy. That's crazy. And I'm gonna start with my rice. Eat like an Asian, think like an Asian. Guys, it's all jokes, come on. Chill out, guys, chill out. Come on. Okay. So let's think why queen c4. Queen c4 prevents knight c5. Knight b6 is already prevented. This is something you have to notice. And again, if you are really a beginner, the reason why you should focus on things like look at your pieces, board vision, is because if you simply missed it, then the fact that the bishop is controlling b6, then nothing makes sense, because queen c4 you just run. If you're calculating from here, you're like, okay, queen c4, oh, there's knight b6, oh, but it's like, no, there's the bishop. So for really beginners, maybe how to reassess your chess is not too good, but maybe it is, because if you disqualified queen c4 because of knight b6, and then you see that queen c4 is indeed the solution, and you try to see what happened on knight b6 and you notice bishop takes, you are improving. It's painful, because if it's stupid, but you're improving, and you're not stupid. So, you know, every chess content in the end is better than no chess content. But okay. Okay, so queen c4 prevents knight c5, which prevents the development of the bishop and the two rooks. So it freezes black's pieces. It frees the e3 square. So you can really play knight e1, knight to d3, knight to c5, and if the knight takes, oopsie doopsie, right? It's a really tough position for black. Now I'm gonna play queen c4 because we cannot just stay here forever. Okay, if it's wrong, it's wrong, it's not wrong. They play rook e8, as you can see. It's not that they can do much. Again, knight h5, then what? You wanna play f5, or really? Or really, tell me more about that. Of course you can't play that. So now again, what to do? I think we can go for this idea. I don't see anything particularly wrong with that. Also, our bishop may go to f3, but I don't know, this is perhaps crazy. The problem is, you see rook e8. What does rook e8 do? Perhaps they want to play queen e6 to trade at least this queen. Knight here to prevent that is an idea, but you have to also calculate, be concrete, just hits the knight back and then plays this with perhaps an improved position for black. Sorry, an improved version for black. I will really just go knight d2. And it's not the best move, interesting. It is a possibility, but as you can see, it's not the most precise. Perhaps rook f2 d1. As you can see, if you play normal logical moves, you can't go too wrong. This was given as an alternative, meaning it's not a bad move. And look at that h6. h6, because in some lines they want to play this, then you take, they move the rook here, and then you jump with the knight, let's say. Right? They want to avoid that. Okay, now, can we go knight d2 now? Rook a3 perhaps? Do they want to go this idea? Because that's also possible. Right? Perhaps they want to go rook a6, threatening knight b6. So if we play rook a3, we prevent that, because on rook a6 we just have rook b3. So that's not stupid at all. Knight here, rook here. Rook here, sorry, so knight here, rook here, knight here, bishop takes, I guess, rook takes, rook here, rook takes, knight takes. Is not terrible, but I'm not too big of a fan. We can also just try to double up rooks on the d-file. Look at that, another idea we just noticed. Look at that. I like it. I'm gonna try to play this. And as you can see, it's not given as a mistake. It means that it's not the move that is the most coherent, but it's also not stupid. Rook a3 is wrong. Yeah, just knight d2. Okay. Fair enough. Fair enough. Intending to move the queen to b3 and then toss the knight on c4 when the rabbit horse will hit a5, b6, d6 and e5. Okay, and that's it. So we are now gonna read it. And here queen c4, black's knight c5 is prevented. However, one must also take note of what the opponent intends. And this leads us to knight d2. you may say this is not proper English. You don't start randomly from however. But I think that the line after test 7 is gonna be the whole game, and we're gonna reach this position, and he's gonna continue with what he was saying in the next line. So knight d2, knight c5, we allowed it. Queen c4, b6, the knight is stabilized. B takes, right? And you may say, well, but they have terrible pawn structure. Yeah, but remember the problems they had because of the evaluation we did? All of a sudden they're going to solve them all. Bishop e6, rooks to the open file, and all of a sudden they're going to have the better pieces. Knight b3, which attacks c5, so if you play bishop e6, you run into queen takes c5. So knight d7 first. With bishop a6 to follow, the bishop can also be activated there. And when black is fine, because again, all of his pieces all of a sudden are doing something. Clearly white needs to demonstrate a bit of subtlety, though you can be very proud of yourself if you notice knight f3, d2 to c4 maneuver. I just thought about other things, it's fine. Rook e8, rook f to d1, h6, queen b4 has also been tried. Gary Lane then gives knight g5, which attacks this pawn. Rook f8 back. If you may say, what about taking the queen? Well, bishop takes attacks the pawn, so you still have to move the rook. And if you move the rook to e7, there may be rook takes with bishop on the, but then you take with the rook. Okay, nothing is complicated. So rook f8, b3. Life keeps going. Queen a2 perhaps is even better. h6, the knight goes back. Knight takes, queen takes, bishop here, look at the pieces. Queen here, bishop there, that's crazy. Queen e4, rook d6, knight f6, and now bishop takes f7 works, bishop takes h6 works, because the knight will hang. Yeah. Okay, let's go back. After h6, if knight to f3, queen takes, bishop takes, white has a little bit of an edge. Again, this knight can't move, so that stops all of the pieces. Rook a6 now cannot be played. You're gonna double up on the d file. You have some pressure over to e5. It's nice position. It's a nice position. You can even play bishop c1, bishop b2, move the knight, and all of a sudden this pawn has trouble. But I don't know about that. So h6, knight to d2, intending to move the queen to b3 and then toss the knight to c4 when the rabbit horse will hit a5, b6, d6, and e5. Okay, so I got some moves, I need some moves. Okay. Now, test 7, so it's the same, but there are extra exercises. So let's go. Well, I can see a move. It looks a bit crazy, but maybe it works. That would be knight b1. That's the same game, just later. Knight b1, I don't remember this one specifically, I think knight b1 makes sense, but knight b1 was also the solution to another exercise, so I'm not sure. Knight b1, with the idea of eventually reaching c4, and then go to d6. And you would have this just monster position, so... Yeah, the reason why I mentioned both is because Initially I only saw knight a3, but then I'm like, they just take it. But then I also saw the other one, so I think going here is just good. I guess we can just reinforce it. No need to panic. Yeah. Okay. Knight b1, a very nice move. The knight didn't have a future on c3, both b5 and d5 are covered, so he heads to c4 via a3 or d2, where it will join in the fight for b6 and d6. Also note that the retreat of the knight makes c2, c3 possible, taking the d4 square away from black's pieces. Now knight d4 is not possible because of bishop takes, or knight takes even. Knight takes is perhaps better, it probably doesn't matter, but you know. So bishop f8, knight d2, bishop c5, just in time for bishop takes b6, knight takes b6, white has total control. Yeah, because basically you may say, yeah, but we didn't get the knight to d6. Yeah, but if you compare this position with this position, right? This position with this position, the only difference is that these two pieces are gone. And you may say, who does that favors? Well, the bishop on f8 is actually a decent piece. Imagine the bishop going to e7, which he can go. Is a decent piece. Whereas, and after f5, take, and pushing, even this bishop on g7 can be strong. But the knight on c3 was terrible. So taking off the board these two pieces favors white tremendously. Okay, let's look at Xie Yun against Bent Larsen. These two names together are, for some reason, interesting. But okay. Let me read it. I didn't want to read because I'm like, the guys read it, right? You guys can read by yourself. I assume you can read if you watch these videos, but I don't know. This position is known, but there is something important I want to say. This position is known to be in white's favor thanks to the two holes on b6 and d6. By now, whenever you see a hole, I would expect you to ask, can I get a knight there? And after some reflection, you may notice that if a knight could reach c4, then both holes will be accessible. Thus, knight d2 suggests itself. Explaining the rating spread, noticing the holes on b6 and d6 shows that you know your stuff, but finding a way to make use of the weaknesses by knight f3, d2, c4 takes it to another level, and then we add on yet another nuance by making you hold off on the knight maneuver in favor of the preventative queen c4. All this makes the solution an advanced players only drill. Now, this way of thinking is dangerous because if you see a hole, you ask yourself, oh, can a knight get there? But you need to understand this is just the first chapter. It's not the first chapter where we're talking about knights taking control of holes. We're going to talk about bishops, rooks, and many other concepts. So when you're going to play a game of chess and you try to apply evaluation, you're going to have the whole knowledge of the book in your head, which you don't. You're going to have a confused version of it. And so you're not thinking about knights. Now we're thinking about knights and holes because that's the chapter what's about. But you're not going to think about that specifically. You're just going to be confused in a real game, right? And so to have a more general way of thinking is a little bit better. So yeah, identify that the square is weak, but to ask yourself, can a knight get there, I think is a little bit weird, at least in the beginning, right? But maybe it's okay, I don't know. Because I'm thinking when you're actually playing a game. Because all these things are cool, but, sorry if I'm a little bit shallow, but I want to win games. So I need to find a way to really make use of these when it comes to me playing. So okay, queen c4, black's knight d5 is prevented. However, one must also take note that c, however, now makes sense. Okay, and it keeps going. If knight d2, knight c5, there is this line that we saw. Right, we already read these comments. h6, queen b4 has to be tried, queen a5 is better tried, knight d2, knight h7, okay, now the game continues. Knight d2, intending to move the queen, okay, we read that, so knight h7, bishop here with the idea of queen b4 was also possible, so knight h7, again this idea knight h5 to push, but the queen is on c4, now queen b3 which keeps the diagonal, you cannot play f5, so they tried g5, it's fine, but now knight c4, here we go, and here knight c5 was played. Knight c5 was played. Knight e6 is better, but rook to d2 still leaves white with a small edge, but they're gonna get a knight to c5 at least. So knight c5, now queen a3, I thought they would take it, but yeah, of course you can also just play queen a3. Now the knight goes back, queen takes, rook takes, knight b6, that's brutal. Rook b8, and bishop to g4. Bishop to g4 is tough because you are threatening to take the knight, and if they take with the rook, they can also take with many other ways, but you can just check and win a piece. Rook e8, just to prevent all of these ideas. Bishop takes. If knight takes, you win an exchange, so h takes. And now we are where we were in the second exercise, which is knight b1. Very nice move, we know why. They get here, they have to trade, otherwise knight on b6 and knight to d6 is just, you can't handle that. Rook to d2, doubling up on the open file as we saw. King e7, rook d1, rook f8. Now knight takes c8, this is the time where you simplify to a winning endgame. Rook takes, because if you take with the other rook, then there is check and you win this pawn, and the whole kingside collapses, so you have to take with this rook. Also, if you take with the other rook, perhaps your king gets mated, because you may not have many squares to hide, but I don't know about that. Check, bishop takes, if you take with the king you get mated, so you have to take with the pawn. And now g4, that's crazy. There's no good defense to the threat of rook to d3, followed by rook f3, that's crazy. That's some genius shit. Okay, we're almost at the end. This chapter took me tremendous amount of brain power, mainly because it's all new stuff, and to do things that I've already done is so painful. So level 1400, 1800, so I'm supposed to be able to do it, but I don't know. Materials equal. Symmetrical pawn structure. Weaknesses. b7 and d6 perhaps. We have f3 and a2 perhaps. Pawn breaks b5 for black. h4, h5 for us. c5, I don't know. d5, we have some breaks. f4, we have a space advantage in the center, on the queen side and on the king side. Okay, let's just go with weak squares. b6 is a weak square. Our weak squares, f4 is a weak square. Okay, having said that, knight a4, knight b6 already comes to mind. I don't remember this puzzle, guys, so that's gonna be interesting. I really don't remember this. I don't know. But that's good, so I can finally exercise myself. We lack coordination. We should really develop our bishop. Really develop our bishop. Yeah, we really should. I'm tired even today. Because I have to eat. I have to eat so much. Because I'm bulking. Because I go to the gym to put on mass. Mass that is. So, let's compare minor pieces. Our knight on c3, well, is better than the knight on f8. This knight has some potential, but it feels like our knight has better potential, perhaps. This knight is quite restricted. Our knight is also restricted, not a big fan of that, but at least it helps in the attack. This bishop and this bishop are kind of the same. This bishop is kind of stuck, but it has potential. It has potential. So, wait a minute, they want to do this, they perhaps want to do this, right? And they perhaps want to take, so they open this bishop. So they may want to do this, they may want to do this, and they may want to take. Isn't there a move we can play that prevents all of this? I don't know, is there? Guys, they want to put a piece on e6, and they want to take our pawn. Is there a move that can prevent both of these ideas? And when they ask you these questions, of course, some of you guys immediately, you already know it, but if these questions are tricky to you, a way you can solve them a little bit easier is don't think about both of them at the same time. That just confuses you. Like, what's a move that really prevents putting a black piece on e6? That's easier. Okay. Does that move also stops e takes d4? And don't think, oh, but if I play that move, things become complicated, I have to calculate. Don't think that. That comes after. The question is that does your move that you have in your mind stops a piece to come to e6 and prevents e takes d4? If the answer is yes, okay, now you have your move. Now it's about having your move doesn't mean you play it. And of course the move is d5, prevents this, but also prevents taking the pawn because the pawn is no longer there. Now we don't play d5. If you were in a real game, you identify this idea, you don't play it. Having your move in this context means you have your candidate. That's a candidate move, d5. Then you can calculate it unless you have other candidate moves. Another candidate move that I have is knight a4, because I want to go to b6, I want to improve the position of this knight. Another move that I have is h4. Another move that I have is bishop g2 or perhaps bishop to e2, because I want to connect the rooks. Like if you thought about, it doesn't matter what this exercise is going to be about. If you are in a real game and you think about these two moves, you think about this move. You're trying to generate some play, but also you're trying to activate this knight through that play. Very important. If you thought about knight a4, if you thought about d5 with this idea, right? Those are all great moves to think. These are all great moves to think. Even d takes e5 in the context of is a capture and I want to calculate it because it's a capture. These are all fine moves to consider. There are a lot of moves, but they're all fine. If you consider any of these moves, it's fine. Right? In my opinion, if you have an argument, it's fine if you even consider king a1 because you feel like it's a little bit unsafe, perhaps can be hit on the diagonal later. I think it's useless to play king a1 here, but if you're rated, I don't know, 1100 and you thought about king a1, so at least you protect it. That's a great thought. You should be proud of that. In this context, it's probably irrelevant because there are more important things, but those more important things are so advanced compared to your level that for you, identifying this possibility is great. Now you learn that in this position there's better, but that's okay. C5 also is a break, creates crazy tension, right? But then you have to really calculate very, very, very correctly. Also, this perhaps allows this. This is not hanging because of the queen. Be careful. Be careful launching your pawns forward. Also, this you have to be careful because you're not addressing any tension in the center, any development. Looks cool, looks fancy, but okay. D5 also you have to be careful, right? So these moves are not easy moves. I think D5 is the move. Because after D5, what is this guy gonna go? Well, this guy can go here, right? But then this becomes even stronger. The guys go here, you can take it. They take. All of a sudden you have a protected passed pawn. And if they take, you still have a protected passed pawn. So this guy is officially a protected passed pawn. Right? They have terrible structure. You're already threatening to push and take. The position is collapsing for them. Right? This pawn's weaker. So complicated. I'm not sure about d5 actually. I'm really not sure. Could be completely wrong, but I don't know. I'm gonna play it. If it's wrong, it's wrong. Turns out it's correct. Now they go here with this other knight, trying to go here. Perhaps even trying to play f5, which is not feasible at the moment, I think. But yeah, I'm definitely gonna go knight a4 here. There is no need to keep supporting these two pawns. Every time you move a piece, the position changes. Every time they move their piece, a position changes. You have to consider these things. But I want to go here to prevent knight c5. And he's wrong. This is very surprising. I am very surprised. Here the move is h4. A move that in the beginning I thought was silly. I consider it just to considering it, but White, read the comment, I'm gonna read it to you because you can't see it fully, but White had a clear advantage and went on to win. So, but I think my move is not so stupid. It makes some sense. I learned that it's wrong, but I'm happy to see knight a4. d5. White intended to begin an attack by playing h4, h5, but the center needs to be closed to make this worthwhile. He also wanted to stop the f8 knight from finding fame and fortune on e6. In other words, he used the advance of his d-pawn to dominate the enemy knight and force it to remain on a purely defensive square. Knight goes back, h4. White had a clear advantage and went on to win. Perhaps after knight c5 you just go to c2 and you don't care. So this position is really advanced because aside from d5 and with this very small idea of preventing knight here, you also want to close the center so that you can launch an attack. And the fact that the knight can land to c5 doesn't really matter. You don't want... The reason why knight a4 is not good is because your idea is not to go to b6. Your idea is to just launch an attack. Very, very nice. This was played by Mikhail Tal. Mikhail Tal is loved by many people because he has these crazy tactical games, but he became world champion beating Botvinnik, so he was positionally speaking elite. So, black just moved this knight to f8 and clearly intends to play knight e6. When it will be able to leap into d4 or f4. Explaining the rating spread. The right move can be arrived at in different ways. Here we go, it says it. For example, if you simply wanted to gain space, then d5 is this. Or if you were worried about e takes d4, which I kinda was, then once again d5 is the move. However, I'm hoping that you notice knight e6 and play d5 in a deliberate attempt to stuff the enemy knight. We can say we saw them all. So d5. Why play d5? Because in time to begin an attack. We already read this comment. And after this move h4, white went on to a. It doesn't show the end of the game, which is interesting. Perhaps Stahl did the usual blundering every move but still winning. The only fans, I'm not talking about certain websites, but the only fans that are worse than the Fischer fans are the Tal fans. And I'm a Fischer fan. So, anyways, yeah, it's true. So here what to do. 1800 to 2000. So let's evaluate the position. 3-3, 3-3. Okay, so materials equal. There is an imbalance in the pieces, but first, pawn structure, pawn structure. Symmetrical pawn structure. Black has more space on the queen side. Interesting. Weaknesses. Perhaps their b6 pawn is slightly weak. Perhaps. Yeah, maybe. We definitely don't have weaknesses, I would say. Pawn breaks, f5 for them, f4 for us. I don't know, that's pretty much it. Okay, so what's the next? Open files, weak squares. Yeah, I would say that's. I wanted to move these weak files, open squares later, but I'm gonna keep it here. So queen b5 is b5 is a weak square. Of course, I see queen b5, but there's knight e6. So yeah, I should have just said b5. Then d5 is a weak square. Yeah, d6 is a weak square. Yeah, those are weak squares because they can never be defended by pawns. You may say also d4 is a weak square. Yeah, but you can always play c3. And then b3 is a weak square. So I wouldn't consider d4 a weak square as of right now. So a move that I can play is knight b1 with the idea knight c3 to control both of these squares. Makes a lot of sense. King safety is the same, both kings are very, very safe. There is this h3 which kinda is dirtying a little bit the white's king defense, but it has some usefulness, I think it's fine. This knight, okay, let's compare pieces. This knight has some future, even here. This knight on the other end is not that good, because even if it reroutes here, you can always play c3 again, limiting the scope of the knight. Whereas because of these pawns are more advanced, after this and this, you can't really limit anything. You don't have c6 against knight to c3. We have c3 although against knight c6. So this knight I would say is better. Nothing. Well, even right now, this knight is really dead. The other knight, well, bishop and bishop. Their bishop's stuck looking at a pawn. Our bishop is putting pressure on both of their pawns and looking at these kings. So our bishop's decent. This knight is terrible. Needs some future. This bishop's not good either. This rook is on an open file. This rook can go to the other file. This rook is on an open file. This rook cannot go to the other file. Of course they can, but it takes a lot of moves. So I would say our pieces are slightly better. What about the queen? The queen is eyeing a more important diagonal in my opinion. So I would say our pieces are slightly better. Our pieces are slightly better. There are no weaknesses in the pawn structure. They have some more space on the queen side, but it shows that is also potentially a weakness. We can play c4 with the idea knight b1, knight c3. But if we play c4, we really weaken d4. How do they get there, though? Well, they can get there. Now they can get there. Now we don't have c3, see? So I'm gonna go with knight b1. Feels weird. I don't remember knight b1 in this position at all. So I have a bad feeling. But let's just go anyways. It's correct. Now they're eyeing this pawn. They perhaps want to play rook a8. To try to trade some pieces here. Well, then connecting the rooks is imperative. Also preventing b5 if that's an idea. And that's correct. That's the first test that I solved, and I didn't even remember this test. So knight b1, you should be getting used to this idea by now. Yeah, let's be real. Let's be real. We saw it quite sometimes. The rest of the game is Fischer. Ooh, I just said I'm a Fischer fan. Sorry, guys. Ooh, we are gonna finally enjoy some real chess. Ooh, let's go. Guys, you need to understand. I love Fischer. You don't understand, bro. The GOAT. I said it. Fischer, the GOAT. I don't care. I don't care. Fischer's different. Hey, don't say that, please. Anyways. Okay, Fischer is Fischering. Fischer is Fischering. This is very nice for white. He has the two bishops. The b5 and c4 squares can easily fall into his hands, and d5 is a gaping hole. Compare this to d4, a square that is not a hole since it can be hailed by the simple c2, c3, exactly. Explaining the rating spread. Yes, another knight retreat. I would have made the rating spread lower, since I know you guys are getting used to your horses going backwards, but the fact that the knight is already eyeing the nice c4 square, and that moves like queen b5 are also very tempting, which I mentioned, funnily enough, makes the problem rather difficult. Yeah, it's not an obvious problem. No, none of these problems are easy, in my opinion. Maybe I'm just bad. Yeah, I'm probably just bad. So knight b1, of course, knight's going to c3 eyeing both of these squares. Now queen b7 was played. On queen c6, knight c3 still. Knight to c7, trying to prevent this infiltration. Rook a7, look at that. Rook a8. White has knight d5. Ah, that's that's crazy. If you take the rook, knight e7 is a fork. And if you take the knight, pawn takes hits the queen. So you can't touch that rook. Knight takes, pawn takes, here we go. Queen has to move, was attacked. Rook f to a1, rook takes a7, the rook here is attacked, the black rook is attacked, so you have to take. Knight f6, attacks the pawn, now queen b5. Queen b5, then I guess if you take this pawn, rook d7 is a little bit annoying, I would assume. Yeah, knight c7, so you take one queen, you lose another queen, but in the end, boom. And after knight d4, indeed, you have this move, and gives white a winning endgame, thanks to the move more active rook, weakness on c5, and the power of white's two wrecking bishops. I'm sure that in this position here, Fischer saw this. I don't care what you say, I believe this. I don't care. Fischer just calculated until the end of the game. Build different. True player of the game. True master of the game. Knight c3. Like, he played very well positional chess, but he also calculated almost like an engine. Like, that's crazy. Knight c3 and white's position is clearly superior. The rest of the game was a beautiful demonstration of technique by Fischer. Let's go! Knight c7. Knight b5. We do not scare easy. We are America. Don't say that to Fischer, though. And notice how rook f to d1, simply putting the two rooks on the two open file, was also strong and certainly the most natural looking move. So, if you evaluate the position, you just do things accordingly, you can't really go too wrong. If b5, then I guess knight here and on knight takes, rook takes, and there are problems on this pawn, you can double up, I don't know. But white decides to swap the knights and gain entry to the b5. To b5 for his queen. Queen c6, instead of allowing the queen to enter, knight takes, queen takes, and now you enter. Black's position is cheerless. Two bishops, pressure down the a file, pressure against b6, more active pieces. Nobody could resist Fischer in positions of this nature. I don't understand why there is this in positions of this nature. Like, isn't it this part of the sentence enough? I don't know, sorry guys. So, rook a8, c3, the French enters the chat. Actually, no. A candidate master with the French enters the chat. So c3, rook takes a1, rook takes a1, rook to b8, rook a6. Things are getting worse for black with every move. Bishop f8, bishop f1. Trying to activate the bishop. The entry of the bishop into the battle marks the beginning of the end. Notice how Fischer makes sure every piece is in play. Of course, the GOAT. King g7, trying to sidestep bishop c4, perhaps that pins the pawn, but it's just very crazy prophylaxis at this point. Queen a4. Interesting. Rook b7, bishop b5. Oh yeah. I was about to ask, why not b5? Because you just take with the bishop. I didn't see the bishop on f1. Nice. Talking about beginners having to improve their visualization skills. Yeah, I also have to, I guess. So bishop b5, total domination. Every white piece is superior to the black counterparts. Knight b8. Attacks the rook. Rook a8. Bishop d6 overprotects the knight so the queen can move. And the rook, I guess, but it's just a move. Queen e1, knight c6. Queen d2, waiting. I'll let the reader decide for himself whether or not the shocking bishop h6, king takes h6, rook g8 does or doesn't work. Yeah, I have no idea. Just be honest. It probably does. So, h5, bishop h6, bishop g5, rook b8, rook takes, knight takes. If you take with a queen, you lose the knight, so you have to take with a knight. Bishop f5, setting some nasty ideas. Knight c6. After bishop e7, queen to g5, takes. We get a picturesque case of a bishop dominating a knight, true. White's queen is also dominating the black queen, yeah. If you move the knight here, you just lose it. If you move the knight here, you just lose it. If you move the knight here, I can take and then take your pawn and take all the pawns. It's terrible. I guess. So knight c6 was tried, now queen d5 attacking the knight. Knight goes back attacking the bishop. Bishop goes here. A funny looking square, but if the queen moves the 7th rank, you basically get mated. And there is an attack on the f7 pawn, which is not banal. So king g8 has to defend. And he takes anyways. A little tactic, you win this bishop, the other bishop's defended. 1-0, that's crazy. Fischer in action. Fischer the GOAT. And having said the truest sentence ever, which is Fischer the GOAT, we conclude. The first chapter is technically the second, it's technically the third. Knights, psychopaths of the chessboard. Okay, it has been 1 hour. Wow, 1 hour. Plus the previous part. I don't know why it felt so heavy and so long, this chapter. Maybe because every time I'm recording these videos I'm half asleep, but I don't know about that. Let's go. Bishops. Speed demons of the diagonals. I'm gonna finish my rice though. Okay, so while knights slowly but surely hop and leap to whatever areas of the board they wish to go, bishops, also known in various insane circles as bellhops, bees, and wily angle sliders, two bishops are on occasion also referred to as two giants or oddly two rabbits, okay, can roar across the length of the board in a single move. By the way, a parenthesis this long with 2 sentences is crazy. Crime against English. Or whatever first language you speak. I would say crime against Italian, because I'm Italian, but... crime against written language. Parenthesis this huge, longer than the sentence with 2 sentences inside. Are you kidding me? Well, technically that's the whole sentence. The parenthesis is still longer than the actual sentence, which is from here to here without the parenthesis. Anyways, it lives for speed. And this little Formula 1 race car makes anything that dares step onto its diagonal potential roadkill. This means that if those diagonals aren't blocked, the bishop can be a fierce and highly prized piece. Bishops have historically been viewed as being either good, the player's center pawn are on the opposite color as the bishop, or bad. The player's center pawns are of the same color as his bishop. However, I no longer like these terms, deeming them anti-intuitive and at times confusing. For example, bad bishops can often be active and as a result very strong, or bad bishops can also be critically useful defenders. Thus, in this book, we'll refer to bishops as active, useful, or tall pawns. So, this complicates things a little bit, and it makes our studying a little bit harder, but it will make our play much easier, you know? Like Usain Bolt says, the Olympic final is the easiest 10 seconds of my life. It wasn't even 10 seconds, but, you know, because if you work very, very hard, then the performance is not, you know, in reality, you know, it's not that it's easy to perform, but depending on what you do as well, but of course, the heavy lifting is done when you study, when you prepare. Okay. So, active bishop, useful, tall pawns. So he's trying to break this old dichotomy between bad and good, and he's saying the bishops are actually a little bit more nuanced than that. So let's see. This is something that also Grandmaster Raven Sturt takes as an approach in his book. I don't remember the name of the book. Okay, so a bishop is considered active if it's outside the pawn chain and or enjoying life on a reasonably clutter-free diagonal. A bishop is considered useful if it's doing an important, defensive or dynamic task or tasks. These are good parentheses, okay? A little bit weird, but they make sense. Such a defensive bishop can be ugly to look at, but its absence would cause your position to undergo serious difficulties. So, it's a useful bishop. A bishop is said to be tall pawn, that would be the bad bishop, I guess, if it's not serving its useful function and is trapped behind its pawns, thus making it inactive. This kind of bishop takes on the persona of an overgrown pawn that sadly can't turn into a queen if it reaches the end of the board. Let's take a deeper look at each of these bishop types. Okay. So if you are a bishop, that's the duality of life. If you are a bishop, you can either a speed demon or a tall pawn. Choose wisely. Okay, so the active bishop. Now we're going to see an example of active bishop. So give a bishop a diagonal that's uncluttered by soda cans, spans its own pawns, or a solid, well-defended wall of enemy pawns, pieces are uncluttered, and we'll consider it to be active. This doesn't mean that an active bishop can single-handedly bring down the enemy position, or that it will even successfully mesh with the rest of its army. That's up to you and your skills at getting all your bits to work together for a particular goal. But an active bishop can dash from one sector to another in a flash, so they always need to be respected. So in this position here, let's evaluate the position very quickly. Materials equal. We have more space in the center and on the queen side. Let's compare the pieces. Our bishop on c4 is better than their bishop on c8. Our bishop on c1 is perhaps better than their bishop on e7. Their knight on d7 is terrible, at least at the time being. Our knight on c3 is better. Their knight on f6 is fine. Our knight on f3 is fine. Our bishop on c1 is the bishop on c1. Okay. Bishop on c4 is a great piece. So white has two active bishops here. His c4 bishop eyes the f1 a6 diagonal and the a2 g8 diagonal. So f1 a6, a2 g8. Black's light square bishop is also active since it eyes the c8 h3 diagonal. The d7 knight isn't considered clutter, so I was wrong in my evaluation, because it can move out of the bishop way whenever it wishes to. However, black's e7 bishop isn't particularly active because it's blocked by the d6 pawn. Of course, it does keep an eye on the shorter d8, h8 diagonal, and it also gives d6 solid support, so it's not close to being a tall pawn. In fact, this bishop can easily become something special after a d6, d5 push, frees the f8, a3 diagonal, or it can assume diagonal supremacy if white ever captures on e5. Takes. Since recapturing d takes e5 would unlock its potential. This shows us that the bishop can become active at the drop of a hat, and that innocent-looking pawn exchanges, d takes e5 for example, can easily turn a dormant enemy piece into an active one. Why are all the bishops in diagram 48 at least reasonably active? This is from the book, I guess this is diagram 48. Because the center is fluid and can open further if pawns are exchanged. However, a couple poor moves can change this all. For example, black plays c5. This is a wrong move, but it is just to showcase. I'm sure the e7 bishop didn't appreciate this move. This unfortunate advance also turns d5 into a gaping hole. d5 though by white, that's crazy. White also seems to be oblivious to the need of his minor pieces. With one push of the pawn, d5 hole has been plugged and the c4 bishop blocked. Talk about self-defeating. Instead of this move, d takes, knight takes. If you take with the pawn, the bishop is still doing whatever it's doing, which is nothing. Knight takes, d takes, queen e2. This bishop is still dead because now it's not controlling the diagonal. will leave black with that all on d5, while the e7 bishop potential has been greatly reduced. Also note that white's light square bishop is a real-life breather, I don't know how to say this, on the a2 g8 diagonal. Alright? Makes a lot of sense. So far it makes sense. Alright? The active bishop, part 2. Whoa. So in the position from active bishop 1, everyone started out with nice bishops. But more often than not, you'll find that your bishop isn't setting the board on fire. What do you do then? Being a fan of the Wizard of Oz, I tried closing my eyes. That's why he created the 3 characters. Clicking my Birkenstocks together and saying, there's nothing like an active bishop. There's nothing like an active bishop. Sadly, it didn't have the desired effect. When I opened my eyes, the bishop was still sitting there doing nothing. Clearly, inactive bishops will remain that way unless you do something about it. In other words, if you possess a lazy bishop that is sitting around daydreaming, you have to find a way to put the thing to work. This mix of bishop awareness, knowledge, and willpower can be quite effective. Rule: bishops are usually strongest in open positions. The fewer pawns in the way of the bishop, the greater its scope. Rule: every time you move a pawn, check to see how it affects the activity of your bishops. Obviously turning an open position into a close one will have a serious effect on the pieces, so train yourself to always take the health and care of your bishops into account. A student of mine was playing white, and he couldn't wait to show me this game. When he reached this position, he stopped and said, I have pressure against d6, so let's evaluate the position very quickly. 7, 7, pawn structure is not symmetrical because there is a 2-pawn island against 1 here. The d6 pawn is a weak pawn. Open 5 weak squares. Yeah, there is this d5 square. There is the d6 pawn, which is weak as well. And, okay. Then there is space. They have a space advantage in the center and the king side. I mean, these 2 squares. We have a space advantage on the queen side, I guess, and the other half of the center. Bishop pair. Okay, we don't have bishop pair, we don't have none of that, but we have a major imbalance, which is bishop against knight. Our bishop is not good. Our bishop is not really good. He's really not. 95, you know. Well, 95 will blunder a pawn. But okay, their knight is not... Okay, their knight is not great, because they have to keep defending this pawn, but our bishop is not great either. So what can we do? Of course, we saw this move. As Dunamai was playing white, and he couldn't wait to show me this game. When I reached this position, he stopped and said, I have pressure against d6, but it's defended by the knight, and the rooks will soon come to its defense too. My bishop isn't doing anything, and suddenly I remember how you constantly yell at me about how I allow my pieces to stay out of play. I got really angry and thought to myself, not this time, yeah, c5, excellent, this is the kind of move that makes teachers proud. Suddenly the slacker on a2 will jump to c4 where we'll be incredibly active. We also can't forget that this pawn sacrifice blows open the d file for the double rooks. So d takes c5. This leads to annihilation. He had to try. Rook a to d8, but now we take this guy, they take this guy. If you take with a knight, there is queen d4, a6, bishop c4, knight takes c4, queen takes d8, whoa. Rook takes, and rook here, and it's GG. I don't know why you wouldn't just take the queen and take the knight. Is there a comment here? Yeah. Bishop takes c4 is not only way more natural. What? Pawn takes, I guess. It seems to be the way better move. I don't understand the purpose. It wins as virtually all moves that do not give back material win, but I agree b takes or rook takes are far more natural. Okay. Oh, and this is from the stuff. Yeah. So yeah, it seems like this move is a little bit ridiculous, but okay. Rook takes d6, rook takes d6, knight takes d6, queen d4, now knight to f7. If you play rook d8, these wins. Yeah, that's terrible. If you go here, you get mated. And if you take the rook with check, and then you lose the game. So knight f7, now queen takes a7, you're already winning a pawn. And white's extra pawn combined with black's loose king should ensure victory, for example knight e5. If you play rook d8, takes, if you take with the queen, lose another pawn. Queen back, controlling the whole board, h5, queen b6. You start to mobilize these pawns. It's pretty easy since black is tightened down to the defense of d8 and b7. White will end things by pushing his queenside majority and make a crash pass pawn. Okay, if we go back, knight e5. Bishop a6 is crazy. If this tactic wasn't there, then white would play rook d5 with a huge advantage, but you play this. Queen b8 check. King g7, bishop takes. If you take the bishop, you lose the knight. This is over. Defends the pawn on a2, opening up the bishop. Attacks the rook. Now, if you take on f2 with the knight, I take the rook, and then you take my rook, I take your knight. If you take with the rook, I sacrifice my rook, and then I take your, and I win, because I have a bishop. So white's winning. So in the game, d takes c5 was played, which is perhaps the most natural. Now rook d7, queen to e8, bishop to c4, look at that. Rook b8, defense b7, queen to f6, this is brutal. Rook e7 is coming. b5, bishop to e6, we do not scare easy. White's piece worked together beautifully, and the bishop has gone from a useless lump of wood on e2 to a slayerable things on e6. At this point, Purple Coyote, not wanting blood to gush from the screen, wisely resigned. I guess Purple Coyote is like the guy playing black and they're playing online. Unless he's really making fun of this guy's opponent. Damn, Silman. Two other things that distinguish an active bishop is its ability to stop enemy passed pawns from a distance and its use as a catapult for its queen. La catapulta. Okay, so here you push. And you first attack the queen. Alright, then you pin it to win it. Catapult. Let's see the function of the active bishop as a catapult. So there is this position, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, bishops, knight, materials equal, we have more space in the center, and the king side, I guess. We have our light square bishop is great, the light square bishop is okay. The bishop on c1 though is very active for us. It only stops the development of the rooks, but is active. The bishop on e7 is less active because their diagonal is less influential. Our queen is better than their queen, so our pieces are slightly better. Our knight is better positioned than their knight, perhaps. Because they're looking at the queen side and the center, we're looking at the center and the king side where we may have an attack. So queen e4, a common but important idea. The queen uses its light square bishop to set up a catapult, usually referred to as a battery, but the term reminds me of a marital debacle, so I try to avoid it. I think you have to know English well to understand this joke. It's about some legal issues between two married people, or am I completely misunderstanding this? Okay, so the queen uses its light square bishop to set up a catapult that will throw it deep and decisively into the enemy position, in this case on h7. This is also known as riding the bishop's vapors. Damn! Okay. So f5 was played. If you play instead g6, Then there is bishop takes h6, and good night. I mean, it's complicated because there is knight takes c5, right? If you take the bishop, you lose the bishop. If you take the knight, you lose the queen. It's not super easy, but there is queen takes, knight takes d3, not the other knight, that would just lose a piece. But now queen a6, which attacks this knight, the knight's trapped. Knight b2, you actually have this move, bishop takes f8, bishop takes f8, and now rook f2 b1. And I got news. He loses the knight and leaves white with an extra rook. Yeah, because we're already up an exchange, so if you win a piece, you win a rook. So f5, e takes, still threatening queen h7, but at least now it shouldn't be mate. Rook e1, knight a5, attacking the queen. There's no real defense. Trying to hold on to e6, falls on its face after queen d7, check. Bishop g5 is crazy. Bishop g5 is crazy. The problem is you cannot take it, but the rook is trapped, so you have to take it. The only other option is to perhaps give up the rook like this, but now you get checked and checkmated. So h takes g5, but knight takes g5. Try to escape. On bishop f8, knight takes c6 is the most brutal thing I've ever seen ever in my life ever. So brutal. Yeah, makes this the other line look like a mercy killing. Yeah, exactly. Rook f8, knight takes e6. What? Silman, you wild. You wild. Oh my goodness. Damn, will make black's toes curl. Bro, this guy's crazy. You guys should check on this guy. I mean, he's dead, poor guy, but you know what I mean. So, I'm too wild in these videos, but nobody watches them, so it's fine. I mean, you watch them, thank you very much. It's all jokes. It's all jokes in good friendship. So knight a5 was tried, but now queen h7, king f7, bishop g5, again trapping the rook. And now black has nothing better than queen g8. Queen g8 trying to swap the queens has to be played. If you take it, you just get brutalized. Oh my, ooh, so bad. So bad. Queen g8 takes, thank you for the rook, takes, bishop back. And black doesn't have enough compensation for the lost exchange. Okay, very nice. I have to recreate all the moves. So there is this, then there is this. Okay. There is pressure on the pawn, there is a check, then there is bishop here, if I'm not utterly insane. Taking here, taking there, and taking here. And we are all good. So the catapult was shown. Now, useful bishop. So we talked about active bishop. We saw how crazy they can be, how dangerous they can be. Now let's talk about useful bishop. All right? So, we are looking at the game Andrei Volokhtin against Yannick Pelletier, played in 2005 in BL. So active bishops are nice, but at times they are merely claiming domination of an important real estate. In that case, you have to find or create something for them to do. The dream bishop is both useful and active. It covers a lot of ground, but is also serving a specific useful purpose. So e4, c5, knight f3, e6, d4, c takes, knight c6, knight c3, queen c7, bishop e3, knight f6, queen d2, bishop b4, threatening e4, so f3 defends it, knight takes d4, trading, bishop takes c3, b takes c3, so you have some sort of a slightly weakened pawn structure, but perhaps you have the bishop pair, you have more active pieces, b6. So white's dark square bishop is active, in that it ties two diagonals, g1, a7 and c1, h6. However, the g1, a7 diagonal is blocked. The b6 pawn is a rock, concrete, biting on concrete. And the c1, h6 diagonal has nothing to do with the battle for the central dark squares. The d6 square in particular is screaming for the bishop's attention. In other words, it's active, but not performing a useful function that relates to the other imbalances in the position. This is super important. Remember when we looked at the previous position where the opponent bishop was on e7? and he wasn't doing nothing on this diagonal, whereas our bishop was like on d3 looking at h7 or something, right? So you have to combine. No, this is actually super important. You have to like combine everything, and also the knights. Like this knight's restricted. The knight would love to go on a weak square, perhaps c4. He can find a way to do it, but it seems like he can't. d5 opens up the position with the king in the center. The bishop pairs, terrible. So we can start to kind of say that white's better and stuff. But I wouldn't necessarily know how to continue this, you know what I mean? Okay. And, okay, this diagonal here has nothing to do with the battle of the center of dark squares. The d6 square in particular is screaming for the bishop's attention, okay? In other words, it's active, this bishop on e3, because he's looking at squares. And the central pawns are on opposite color, because he's on a light square, the e4 pawn. But he's not doing anything useful compared to the imbalances of the position. For example, again, the weak square on d6, more space in the center, right? These are imbalances. Of course, white's potential dark square control is offset by the weak pawns on the c file. So black has his chances too. Nevertheless, even if the chances are more or less balanced, it's still up to white to pose problems for his opponent by milking his positive imbalances for all they're worth. After 26 minutes thought, so Grandmaster Voloktin played the most principled move. And that's crazy. Bishop c1 is crazy. Now I remember this move, so I read this already too. But that's crazy. Bishop c1 is a crazy move, bro. And if you think about it, it's logical. You ask yourself how to go to d6, but I thought about bishop f2. Bishop c1 is crazy. Bishop c1 is crazy. It's just crazy. Oh, wow. Insane. But it makes sense, I guess, because if they castle, you get there. If they don't castle, you prevent them from. Bishop f2 is, I don't know, maybe it's not that good. Heading for a3 and ultimately d6. Now black has to be very careful that his knight doesn't get stuck in the center. However, guys, notice that this guy thought for 20 minutes, 26 minutes, he thought for half an hour, and the guy is Grandmaster. Grandmaster Voloktin. Like, just the name tells you he's a strong Grandmaster. So if a strong Grandmaster thinks for 30 minutes, like, these things are not easy, guys. And of course, he thought about 3,000 other things, but to make sure that bishop c1 was really decent. And now e5. This fine move stops e4, e5 ideas and also chases the queen off its powerful central post. Wars were queen c5, queen takes, b takes, bishop a3, d6 long castle, king e7 defends, e5, d takes, bishop takes, king e8, bishop b5 check, bishop d7, rook takes, knight takes, rook d1, rook d8, c4. Analysis by Voloktin. So, you know, he's thinking quite a bit in those 30 minutes. Who says, with the idea of bishop a4, bishop a3, so moving the two bishops here, c5 and c6 wins. That's crazy. That's just crazy. But okay, after bishop c1, this great move by Voloktin, of course there's also bishop e7. Now bishop a3, preventing castling, rook c8, attacking c4, attacking c3, now c4, and here bishop a6, really attacking that pawn, because if you play e5 instead, queen d6, and queen d2 are both strong, okay? Now e5 attacks the knight has to go back, bishop d3, excellent move for some reason, bishop c4 castle, getting rid of the weakness, but still keeping it going. And black's lack of development and central king will leave him with serious long-term difficulties. Sample lines knight e7, rook a to c1, knight c6, on queen b8 there is takes, rook c1, queen b7, queen b4 threatening mate, knight moves, queen to e4. If you take, I take, the knight's hanging and also c8 falls. So queen b8, queen to c4, threatening queen to c8 with devastation. And black problems remains. So after knight c6, queen e4, queen d8, and d4. And black is left with an unenviable defensive task. Very interesting. So there is e5, queen d2 castle, bishop a3 attacks the rook, rook to e8, and now bishop to b5. Instead of, at this point, rook e6, in the actual game, black went down in defeat after a6. So a6 was played, however, rook to e6 was good, c4, bishop b7, long castle, and this would have been more or less equal. I'm not understanding anything, guys, so don't worry much about it. Bishop d6, queen a7, bishop to b4, b5, bishop to b3, bishop b7, long castle, a5, a3, rook pressures the pawn, g4, now I just starts to attack. Now wins a pawn. How did he win this pawn? That's crazy. So if you take, what happens? If you take, I guess queen takes, threatens mate, threatens f7, now that the knight goes here. You know, and so you can defend everything, but in the end the knight falls and you regain the piece with interest. So queen takes d7, again threatening f7 if you take on e5. Queen takes e5 anyways, now bishop check, king here. Bishop takes c8, so he doesn't bother about the knight, I guess. Oh no, the other bishop hangs, never mind. Rook c7, trying to complicate things. Also threatening queen f7 mate, because why not? So rook c7, queen e8. Now if you take the bishop with the queen, you lose the rook. So check, moves, attacks, queen b6. If you take the bishop, you lose the bishop. And that's it, because you're going to be up an exchange plus the attack. If you take on f3, you lose because of rook f1. Rule: while an active bishop might look good, a useful bishop trades style for substance and addresses the deeper needs, both dynamic and defensive, of a position. Okay, makes sense to me, guys, makes sense to me. Okay. Now let's talk about the useful bishop again. Okay, there's a little bit of an introduction. So, the useful bishop can also be purely defensive. One would think that white should stand better here. Okay, so let's look at this. So, choo, 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 choo. It's not a train. So material is equal. We have more space on the queen side and in the center. King safety is tricky because despite we have the better structure, all of their pieces, I mean all of their heavy pieces are pointed towards the king side, right? Their knight though is pretty terrible, our knight is a little bit better. Their bishop's terrible, apparently, we're about to see what they say. Our bishop is better, so yeah, but their rooks are better, their queen's better. Our rooks are worst thanks to this bishop. So this bishop is keeping our rook worst, and our queen is also much worse than their queen. Their queen is amazing. Okay, I would love to move my chair. Why can't I move my chair? Come on, move chair, move. Okay, the chair moved. One would think that white should stand better here. His bishop is far more interesting. His bishop is far more active than black's silly-looking thing, while the e6 pawn, sitting on an open file and facing off to a pair of enemy rooks, is weak, and the e5 square is a gaping wound in the middle of the board. To top it off, white even has the move. Yet, things aren't so clear. It turns out that white's d-pawn isn't as safe as one might suppose. While the threat of rook takes f3 shattering white's king position is serious and needs to be dealt with, still white can avoid that unpleasantness with both rook to e3 and knight to e5. So isn't white better after all? To find an answer to this, we need to address the bishops. It turns out that the active white bishop, with the proud trumpeting over its domination of the b1 h7 diagonal, isn't helping the rest of its forces deal with rook takes f3, or with the weakness of e5, or its own slightly loose pawn on d4. Yeah. On the other hand, black's despised mutant on d7 is single-handedly keeping e6 intact. Another way to look at this is that one bishop is holding off two enemy rooks. Yeah, I mentioned that. Did I mention it? I definitely thought it. I think I mentioned it. And once e6 is no longer in peril, that inactive piece can emerge from behind its own lines via bishop b5, boom. Or bishop a4, boom. Or bishop from d7 to e8 to g6, boom. Or bishop d7 to e8 to h5, boom. Create its own brand of activity outside its pawn chain. Boom. Okay, I'll stop it. Let's see how play continued. Knight e5. Here we go. If you play rook e3 to trying to overprotect this knight, rook takes f3. My student, Mr. Schlock, he's almost a detective, but not quite, missed this idea earlier when he blitzed the move to gain some time on the clock. He insisted that he wouldn't have missed it again. Rook takes f3, rook takes f3, bishop here looks fantastic, but rook takes f2 is a little bit tricky. And after king takes f2 there is a check, then there is a check. And black with two good center pawns for the exchange has no reason to be unhappy. But okay, it involves difficult play, obviously. So knight e5, knight takes e5, not knight takes d4, bishop g6, damn. Knight takes c2 check, rook takes c2, and you're gonna lose some heavy material. So knight takes c5, rook takes e5 attacks the queen. D takes e5 makes no sense since it fills the hole on e5, turns the d5 pawn into a passer, and blocks both white rooks. Remember, you want to make moves that do good things for your position, not good things for your opponents. So rook takes e5, queen to h4. This pawn is not hanging because of bishop h7 picking up the queen, so it just overprotects f2. Queen f4, again, this pawn is not really hanging. Now rook goes back. The pawn's still not hanging. Queen g5. Perhaps threatening e5, bishop takes, even though there is the rook. Yeah, it's complicated. g3. Queen h5. King h2. In the actual game, white set up a trap and black fell right into it. f4. Queen takes h3. Correct was g5 with mutual chances in a complex battle. So here you should have played g5, which is crazy. But now rook h2. Here I was hit by that I'm going to vomit feeling I always get when I realize I've hung my face. Mr. Sherlock. I can't unread Sherlock here. Schlock. Queen g4, rook h4, since the queen is lost. Alright. So king h2, e5, d takes e5, not rook takes e5, because of queen takes h3, king g1, bishop g4, and then bishop f3 happens, I guess. D takes c5, queen takes, king back, d4, rook to e4, trying to play rook h4 maybe, e6, pairs out to equality after d takes, check, takes, bishop c6, bishop to e4, bishop takes, rook takes, queen to f5, okay? But rook e4, rook to f3, bishop c4, check, king h8, queen to e1, d3, rook to d2, bishop c6, once a useful defender, now black's bishop has morphed into a fierce attacker. Rook h4, crazy they even have this move. Queen f5, bishop takes, rook takes, rook f4, queen h3, takes, g3. And this is a perpetual. That's crazy game. White really saw his end at some point there, but survived. Now let's talk about the tall pawn. So this is like when the pawn is really bad. Okay, we are approaching the end. Let's do this final effort. I really want to stop this video and just go to sleep. I'm really tired even today, despite I slept 10 hours yesterday. But I'm gonna push it and do at least the tall pawn. Because I want to reach new chapters, things I haven't seen. So, a bishop is said to be a tall pawn if it's not serving a useful function and is trapped behind its pawns, thus making it inactive. This kind of bishop takes on the persona of an overgrown pawn and is something you should desperately try and avoid having. The worst cases of tall pawns occur when a bishop finds itself entombed. Here is a graphic example. A true nightmare for white. This kind of bishop usually loses in the middle game and the endgame. In both cases, the side with the entombed piece is in effect playing with a piece less. Here, black's only concern is getting his king to e2. Here, where he can start vacuuming up all of white's kingside pawns. There's only one way to accomplish this goal: c3. This turns the a4 pawn into an outside pass pawn. Once white's king is forced to the a file so it can capture the a pawn, black kings will have clear path to e2 nirvana. I think we already saw this position, didn't we? Sorry, after king c4, bishop g1, king b2, check, and it's over. So bishop g1, a3, bishop back, a2, king here, promotion. It's kind of a little bit the same thing. And f2 will fall and then you will promote. Okay, very interesting. So we push, we go here, we go here, we go here, promote. We go here, we go here. Well, it doesn't matter. And we win. Okay, tall pawn part 2. Our next example shows the most common kind of entombed bishop. A student of mine, Daniel S., became a fan of the Bobini setup in the English opening. That would be this: c4, c5, g3, g6, bishop g2, bishop g7, knight c3, knight c6, e4, knight f6, d3, castle, knight g2, e2, d6. It's just one possible move order, okay? While teaching it to him, I pointed out a typical device that I assured him would occur from time to time. To my surprise, it appeared in many of his blitz games and allowed him to reel in one point after another without a fight. Okay, so c4. So we said c4, knight f6, knight c3, g6, g3, bishop g7. This one move order to reach that thing. Attacks h3, defends it, c5, f4, queen e8, f5, goes back, develops, a6, g4 supports the f5 pawn, g5 even, knight e6, crazy things, queen d8. This one-sided position occurred after black badly misplayed the opening, now f6 even, that's crazy. Forces the bishop to h8, where it will lay, like someone that's buried alive, for the rest of the game. Hey, Mr. Beast! Okay. As mentioned earlier, such a bishop allows white to confidently play on the kingside, center, or queenside, since he will have a piece more taking part in the battle. The finish was a typical bit of a blitz brutality. So bishop h8, the bishop is a tall pawn, it's really terrible. Bishop f3, knight here. It's like a square control 3000 times, but it's fine. Knight here, at least it has some activity. That was the reason behind sacrificing the pawn, but it missed the tactics. After you play knight e5, the knight is no longer defending the crucial e7 square, and here black is forced to resign because he's just losing the queen straight up. Because the black king is actually mated, in no small part thanks to this bishop. So that was brutal. It is what it is, though. It happens. So this is Alexander Grishuk against Christian Bauer, played in 2005, so we're talking about two super strong players. Entombed bishops are the exception, however. The most common tall pawns are simply bishops trapped behind and blocked by their pawns. So e4 d5, Scandinavian, by Christian Bauer. Oh, I have the Christian Bauer book on the Scandinavian. So he actually plays it. He goes with the queen a5 line, d4, knight f6, bishop d2, c6, bishop c4, bishop f5, knight d5, goes back, takes, knight f3, e6, c3, knight e7, knight h4, goes after the bishop pair, knight b6, does the same, goes back, controls the knight, bishop g6, queen f3, pressures f6, nothing terrible, bishop e7, or overprotects perhaps, prepares to castle, but I don't know, g3, interesting squares, perhaps giving some more support to the knight, and perhaps after you move f5, he doesn't want to take the light square bishop, wants to go knight g2, knight f4, knight d3, I don't know, queen to d7, castles f5, here we go. The problem with black's position is the bishop on g6. It really does look like a tall pawn, doesn't it? This unfortunate piece can't emerge on h5, white's queen is keeping that square under wraps, and if he tries to escape to f7 or e8 via f6, of course, f7 and e8 don't look so great either. Yeah, they don't look good, these two squares for the bishop. Then the e6 pawn will turn into a serious weak target, okay? Knight g2, stopping bishop, and of course here you may wonder, what about taking? Yeah, but we said that that's their worst piece, so you want to keep it on the board. Stopping bishop takes h4, getting ready to hop into f4, and also preparing to torment black's light square bishop, which h2, h4, h5. So knight e5, knight f4, long castle, rook fe1. The rook eyes e5 and also serves a prophylactic role. The f7, f6 push, as unattractive as it may be, is ruled out right away. Very nice. So knight takes, bishop d6, bishop takes, queen takes, rook to e5. Now if you play f6, I just destroy you. While black's bishop is pretending it's a pawn, white's bishop will serve as an active role in center, and on the queen side, it will never have to worry about being challenged by the long pawn g6. So king b8, bishop c4. This makes way for the advance of the b-pawn, rook h to e8, hoping to play f7, f6 with e6, e5 to follow, so rook a to e1, no counterplay allowed, rook e7, b4, preparing a queen-side pawn storm, and now rook c7. Black decides to remain passive, but this leaves him to no hope whatsoever of survival. Had he played rook a to d8 to go all out for f7, f6, there was this queen f4 move which pins the queen, so the queen is not really defending e6 after f6 because you just take it and the queen is pinned. So rook takes f5 here even is a threat, where if you take the queen I just take back, winning a pawn, and if you don't I take your queen. So now the rook takes f5 is a threat, and stopping it by rook d8 is a return to passivity that then black's f7, f6 hopes, yeah. Nevertheless, he needs to activate his pieces, even if it loses a pawn, anything is better than sitting around waiting to die. Thus my recommendation is still f6, and here you don't have to fall for rook takes c6, which is what I thought, but here queen takes f4 and your dreams are over. G takes, rook takes, rook takes. If you take with the bishop, bishop here is deadly, because you can't move while defending. So rook takes. Rook g8 now, which is crazy. And after you play king f1, bishop f7 wins. He didn't win before because we could take the rook with check, but this won a tempo. So rook takes f5, e5, d takes, pawn takes, queen here. It's important to have this move, I guess. Rook d7, rook down, rook f8. When white's a solid pawn ahead and obviously better, but all of black's pieces are dancing to their own tune, an active army always gives you at least some fighting chances, okay? So let's go back, so rook c7, now h4, threatening h5, trapping the bishop. Sorry. What the fuck? Sorry, but I'm getting crazy because I'm moving back and... Okay, h5, sorry. A classic tall pawn on g6. a4, missing bishop takes e6, and here you have to play f4. After f takes e6, there's rook takes e6. So you have to play f4. And now bishop h3, f takes g3, queen takes g3, and this wins. So a4, queen f8, queen f4. This freezes the f5 pawn, takes aim at the enemy king along the h to b8 diagonal, and denies the black queen use of h6. The rest of the game was a squash. Rook d2 c8, bishop f1, bishop h7, bishop e2, bishop g6, bishop f3. Now if you move the bishop back to h7, with some ideas of playing bishop g8, over protecting e6 and pushing f6, well, we're going to drop h5, so king a8, b5, opening it up, queen a3. If you take, I guess I can take with the rook, and if you take on c3, I take on b7 with the rook and you lose. So queen a3 trying to attack a4, a5. Now if you take on a5 with the queen, you lose, because b takes c6 attacks your queen and attacks b7 with the bishop behind. If you take on b5, again I take with the rook defending everything. If you take on c3, I guess I can take on c6, and after b takes c6, rook c5 is strong, followed by rook c1, but I don't know. Takes, a6, rook takes, brutal. Takes, rook b1, brutal. Queen e7. On rook here, queen c7 is just terrible. So queen e7. Rook takes, queen takes, bishop takes, king here. It's not like super elementary, but it kinda is. Now if you take on c3, there is queen b6, which is just devastation. You're gonna win with the a-pawn, so maybe even winning the white's rook. Now f4, look at that, bishop is dead. Even at the end, the black bishop is still on g6, alone and forgotten. Clearly, you need to think twice before placing your pawns on the same color as your bishop. In general, you should only do this if your bishop can get outside the pawn chain, which will make it active, or if your bishop is proving useful, most likely as a defender, inside the chain. Of course, all the knowledge and good intentions in the world won't stop you from ending up with a tall pawn from time to time. If this occurs, you need to get your pawns off the collar of your bishops, unlocking it, get your bishops outside of the pawn chain, exchange the horrible bishop for an enemy bishop or knight. Alright? Okay, I'm going a little bit fast, guys, I'm a little bit tired, but again, what matters is that we complete this. I have a full-time job, a lot of you guys have as well. Perfection kills progression, so we have to go. The next example, played at a slow time control, so there was plenty of time to think about what was going on, shows both sides ignoring all these rules. I don't know about black, but white was familiar with these ideas, so probably white is a student. So c4, knight f6, g3, g6, bishop g2, bishop g7, knight c3, castle, e4, so they keep playing this Botvinnik, d6, knight g2, e2, c5, castle, e5, d3, knight c6, bishop g5, bishop e6, knight e5, bishop takes, pawn takes, knight e4, knight takes, pawn takes, queen d2, rook e8. The opening was badly played by both sides, so don't pay much attention to it. Black was obviously used to people trying to swap their dark square bishop for his, and apparently he had learned to avoid it with this little rook move. The idea is that bishop h6 cannot be met by bishop h8 when the rook will no longer be vulnerable to the white bishop on h6. To the uninitiated, this might sound quite profound. However, it's also completely wrong. The truth is that in this particular position, black should welcome the exchange of dark square bishops with open arms. There are a couple of reasons for this, but the most pertinent is that the g7 bishop is a tall pawn that's trapped behind its chain. Yes, it does defend some squares, but all in all, it's a pretty ugly piece. This misconception on black's part rears its head again in a few moves. Rule: don't hesitate to exchange your bad pieces for the opponent's good ones. So rook a to c1, white also fails his bishop x7. His g2 bishop isn't very happy, so white needs to activate the thing by getting it outside the pawn chain. Thus bishop h3 is correct. Get your bishop outside the pawn chain. This not only stops potential knight g4 moves, after white pushes his f-pawn to f4, but it also prevents black from posting a rook on the open c file. Queen to b6. Now f4. White is only thinking of mates, so less brutal ideas like getting his bishop outside the pawn chain with bishop h3 are not entering his mind. Knight to d7. Better was knight g4, heading for e3. Oh, okay. f5 now, bishop h3 is still screaming for attention, f6, and now bishop h6, here we go. Both sides are getting solid f's in bishop 101. White needed to feel his g2 bishop pain and play f takes g6, unlocking the h3 c8 diagonal. Yes, it sacrifices a piece, but this was not necessary thanks to white's blocking the diagonal with f4, f5. Try to not entomb your bishop behind the pawn chain. Turns out that the capture on g6 is very strong. For example, f takes g6, and black has to play this queen d8 little thing. If f takes g5, g takes h7, king h8, rook f7, because if you play king takes h7, rook f7 still, queen d8, rook here, which is just brutal. Queen is overworked. This is over. Rook g8, queen h5 is made. So king h8, rook f7 still, queen back, bishop to h3 finally, knight c5, attacks it, bishop c8 is crazy. Nah, that's crazy. That's crazy. That's crazy. If h takes bishop h6, and if g takes h7, I don't know where we are. And this is with a winning attack for white. Notice the huge role white's ignore light square bishop plays in all these variations, okay? So bishop h6, bishop h8 is also a blunder. Poor meat puff is still trying to retain his stalled pawn. I think that's the name of the guy, Meat Puff. Instead, poor Meat Puff. Silman is so brutal. So g5, bishop takes, king takes, shines a very different light on the position. In that case, black wisely got rid of his inactive bishop while keeping white's f-pawn on f5, thereby turning the g2 bishop into a tall pawn. The resulting situation is very comfortable for black, who has a safe king and enjoys a knight in a close position versus an inactive bishop. That's crazy. That's great. Meat puff. That's great. F takes g6. Suddenly white wakes up and smells the stagnating bishops. H takes, bishop h3, great. h4 followed by bishop h3 is probably even more accurate. Nevertheless, bishop h3 proved more than adequate to turn the tide permanently in white's favor. The rest of the game is worth looking at just so you can see how strong a bishop can become if you manage to get it outside the pawn chain. So let's see. Let's focus on the light square bishop, I guess, eventually. Now the knight's restricted, the knight tries to escape, the queen attacks it, the rook defends it. Queen d2, knight attacks the pawn, check, king here, pawn h4, knight takes a3, king here, knight back, rook h1, knight c3, rook here, queen here, pawn here, threatening check, and all sort of crazy nasty shit. Bishop takes, f takes, light square bishop's a monster, check, 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 brutal. Threatening mate, check. Why not taking though? Oh. What about rook f8 immediately? Mate. So why not taking? This just goes to show... I don't understand. Couldn't just take? This just goes to show that knowing strategic concepts in a theoretical sense is one thing, while being able to actually notice them and put into a real battle situation is quite another. And make no mistake about this, make no mistake about it. This inability to turn knowledge into practical application goes right up the rating ladder. One student during our first lesson, rated 2150 FIDE, got angry when I began to talk about the proper use of minor pieces. He said, "I already know all this stuff." Yet, as we went through his games, he would fail to implement any of it. Instead of treating his minor pieces right, he constantly got sidetracked by more important thoughts, material, attack, etc. Naturally, when he lost to superior players, he rarely understood what went wrong. And that was a 2150 FIDE. Yeah, there are levels to the game. To cure this illness, you need to learn the basic ideas and concepts given in this book. Reinforce the information by constant repetition. Try to solve as many chess problems as possible that are devoted to imbalances. Oh, this is crucial. Oh, this is crucial. I want to take a picture of this. How do I do it? I'm going to take a screenshot. Guys. I'm not just going to take a screenshot, though. What if I do this? You see nothing. It's fine. Sorry, guys. Tall pawn 3. You know, this tall pawn 3, it has such an important concept in it. Right? That's crazy. I'm going to save this. I'm going to save it as important Silman concept. And I'm going to save it in the usual file where I save the important things, which is not the file where I save the important things, it's the file that I open more often. So, okay, disappears back. Sorry guys, a second. I have to check. Why can you see that? You shouldn't be able to see this. Interesting. You shouldn't be able to see this at all. Okay, you can't see that now. Okay. Sorry guys, I have to check one thing. Weird behavior by the recording software there, very weird. I didn't like that. I didn't like that at all. Okay. Yeah, that's very bad. Anyways, so sorry guys, I got distracted for a second, but I had to check something. So, but there's nothing I can do anymore, so it's fine. It's not fine, but let's say it is. Okay, so, here I early understood what went wrong, and now Chessable, of course, he's crying like a bitch because, you know, I didn't pay to him full attention, poor guy, poor girl, whatever. Okay, to cure resilience, you have to do these things. So learn the basic, reinforce the information, try to solve as many chess problems as possible that are devoted to imbalances, go through your own games and make a serious effort to spot where you could have improved the life of your minor pieces. Okay. So let's view this. Hopefully you guys can see everything. Skip this, because that's what we just started. Okay, and that's pretty much it. Then there is bishops of opposite colors. And there's going to be 3, 4 summary and then the test. Is this long? Because I may do it. 30 minutes more. Let's do this too. Bishop of opposite colors. Let's go. Let's go. So, we have a whole herd of the strange goings on in relation to bishops of opposite colors. Aren't those things supposed to make endgames unwinnable even if you are a gazillion pawns down? Are we supposed to court them or avoid them? Is it true that the apocalypse is upon us if bishops of opposite color appear on every board at the same time, in the same round of the same Grandmaster tournament? Yeah, pretty much. I run into questions like this all the time. Of course, bishops of opposite color is merely a bishop versus bishop battle. Yet, it's a strange battle that resembles a war between two creatures in different dimensions. Because they will live on different color diagonals until they are placed in the aftergame box, the bishops can't touch. They can't defend what the other attacks, or attack what the other defends. And if you place your pawns and or king on the opposite color of the enemy bishop, the ghost bishop will find that it can't touch anything at all. Continue, exit. So that was easy. Now let's look at the game. It's not a game, it's an endgame. So, okay, this is an insane position. Insane position. But though it's ridiculous, it does a very good job at showing how absurd a bishop of opposite colors can be. Here white is 2 pawns and 3 pieces ahead. Black is passive, and white's king is also far better placed than black's. Yet the game is a dead draw. How can this be? The problem for white is that his armada of dark square bishops can't touch a light square, if their lives depend on it. This means that the only white unit that can attack the c6 square, which is this, and the g6 pawn, which is this, is the king. And since those two targets are so far apart, white's king can't skip from one to the other in a single move. Thus, black will always have a pass move with his king. King c6 to d7, king c6 to d5, and back to c6 and over, or bishop h5 to d1, to bishop back to d1, depending on the direction white's king has gone. Let's look at some moves. So for example, king e6, bishop d1, king f7, now bishop h5, bishop c2 loses to h5, g takes, g6. When black's remaining piece will soon have to sacrifice itself on g6 or g8. This tells us that the black bishop must do 2 jobs in this position here. Actually, in this position here. 1, defend g6 if it's attacked. 2, never lose contact with the h5 square. That way, h4, h5 can always be met by bishop takes h5 when white fails to get a pass pawn. So bishop h5, bishop c2 e5, king d7, bishop d6, king c6, king f6, king d6, king d5, king e7, threatening to take control over c6 by king d7, king c6. Now we see that whenever white's king is ready to challenge for the c6 square, black's king must immediately scurry back to c6 and let his light square bishop take over the passive duties. So bishop d1, of course if you go here, king d7, check, king c7, when white has gained control over c6, thereby freeing the c5 pawn. King e6, bishop g4, check, king here, bishop h5, on bishop f5 again h5, so bishop h5, king f6, king d7, half. Since white can't make any progress, it's clear that if we remove 3 of white bishop from diagram 61, we will get a more realistic endgame where white can't win with 2 healthy extra pawns. And this is where the quasi-truth that bishops of opposite colors often allow the defender to draw otherwise lost endgames comes from. But please note the word often. Many endgames with bishops of opposite colors are also won. Alright, okay. Alright. So bishop of opposite colors. This position has the same basic dynamics as found in the previous position. If white can win the e6 pawn, so let's evaluate this position. White has 2 more pawns. 2 more pawns, we are moving up, so we're trying to win. Pawn breaks at d5, for example. Okay. If white can win the e6 pawn, win the c6 square, or turn his e5 pawn into a passer, the game will be his. If black can stop white from doing those things, the game will be drawn. In this case, the 2 areas of combat, e6 and c6, are just a step away from each other, so white wins. Note that the game would be a draw if black's bishop stood on a2, b3, c4, or d5. Okay. Now, bishop f5. No better is bishop to g8, d5 check anyways. The key, black has to take with the king and give up c6, or take with the pawn and give white a passed e-pawn. So if this move, you play e6. If this move, you are able to get to c6 and you win. So you go here, you push, they push, you go here, they push, you push, they have to block, now you check, they have to go here, c7, and a pawn queens. So bishop f5, but now d5, check, he takes, King takes, there is king d7 and c6 will follow, so he takes. Now the pawn pushes, d4. Now you move. 7. Bishop f4 to stop the promotion of the pawn, and then you will win their bishop and the game. Okay, this is very difficult. So we push, we go here, we push threatening to promote, we check, now we stop, we win. Okay, that was difficult, I'm tired for these puzzles, guys. Bishop takes c6. Okay, so let's go from the very beginning. This was played between Alexander Reprinstev against Josh Guo, Ottawa 2007. Okay, for c5, b3, knight c6. Very unusual opening, I would say. Very unusual. Very unusual. Yeah, really unusual. h6, rook takes, bishop takes. Sorry. Okay, here we go, this position here. So 2-1, we are up a pawn. Okay, we are up a pawn. We're trying to win this endgame. We have more space, better king. Alright, healthier pawn structure. It's clear that bishop of opposite colors can be a real problem for the superior side. If you have an extra pawn or two and feel that opposite color bishop might make the winning process a nightmare, then go out of your way to exchange one of the bishops. This sounds obvious, but I've seen many players not grab the chance for such trade and pay for it later in a lost half point. In this position, white has a solid extra pawn and the superior king, which would love to rush into the enemy position via king d3, king c4, king b5, king a6. However, the d4 pawn is under pressure and a possible knight c7 will keep white's king out of b5. Even more bothersome is the presence of bishops of opposite colors. So, without further ado, he snapped off that knight and ended the opposite bishop threat. Bishop takes c6, f takes c6. Now how to proceed? Well, knight f4, threatening knight g6 and also ties the enemy king to the defense of e6. So the bishop moves. Now a4, e5, d takes. Not a happy move, but if you play bishop takes e5, knight g6, followed by knight takes e5, leads to a hopelessly lost king and pawn endgame. Yep, we studied those in the other course. King d6, now king c4, here we go. No muss, no fuss. Getting rid of the opposite color bishop made the whole winning process smooth and worry-free. Okay, so we take it, we threaten it. Now we play a4 to prevent b5. Now we take, and they have to take with the pawn. With the pawn, yeah, with the pawn, yeah. And now, bishop of opposite color, part 4. Ladies and gentlemen, we are almost at the end of this adventure. Almost. Although bishops of opposite colors do increase the defender's chances of holding an inferior endgame in many cases, I have to reread this because I'm so tired I can't understand what I'm reading. Though bishops of opposite colors do increase the defender's chance of holding an inferior endgame in many cases, the same opposite color bishop favors the attacker in a middle game or endgame. If more pieces appear on the board. So in this position here, let's evaluate it. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. So we are up 2 pawns. We have more space. We have a better king. We have a better rook and bishop because they're attacking. So white is much better when it comes to pure statical evaluation. It's time to look for moves, you know. However, so white is up 2 pawns. However, his queen set majority is frozen and black's by black's a pawn and bishop. Okay, What really makes black's life a living hell is the combination of white's rook and bishop hitting f7. This completely immobilizes black's army and leaves him waiting helplessly while white improves his position. The hit against f7, combined with the extra kingside pawn, ensures an easy victory for white. If it was white to move here, I'm looking at king to f5, which threatens rook takes f7. And after rook takes f7, check king g6. And you are up 3 pawns now with the passed pawn on e5. Again, opposite color bishop, but if you start to be up 3 pawns and after f5 you have crazy attack, it's a problem. So g6, in my mind, prevents king f5, but I can't be sure. g4, trying to play f5, I guess, and really like crush through, I don't know. Bishop c3, f5 indeed, g takes, bishop to b4. Now f6, look at that. Complete immobilization. Bishop c3, king f5. White calmly brings all his pieces to their optimum positions before starting the final assault. When your opponent is helpless, enjoy the luxury of putting every part of your position in perfect order. Bishop b4. Black's bishop is forced to keep a permanent eye on b4. Bishop b2, for instance, allows b4, and this pawn just goes. When the black b pawn isn't going anywhere, thanks to the opposite bishops, interesting, while white's passed a pawn will confidently head for a transformative experience on a transformative experience. Silvan's the best, man. It's just so good. e6 now, look at that. F takes e6, bishop takes e6, king h8, king g6. And black will soon be mated. To show you how important the existence of the rooks was to white's cause, let's look at the same position, sans rooks. Now black's king is free, and after king f8, king e7, king f8, e5, king e7, whites won't be able to win the game against correct defense, though it would be a fool not to try for a long time. Okay. Interesting. So we saw that. Then let's go to summary, and then we're gonna go to the test. Actually, we are not gonna go to the test. I'm gonna do the tests tomorrow in another video. And then we're gonna move to even further chapters. I have to tell you guys, objectively speaking, these lines here, I am pretty sure I have never saw. So we are officially in territory where I'm also experiencing these lines for the first time. So it's pretty cool, we are truly reading it together now. Because I already read some lines from the previous chapters, and I think the first few of this chapter, but now I'm in unexplored territory myself. So, a bishop is considered active if it's outside the pawn chain and or enjoying life on a reasonably clutter-free diagonal. A bishop is considered useful if it's doing an important, defensive or dynamic task or tasks. Such a defensive bishop can be ugly to look at, but its absence will cause your position to undergo serious difficulties. Try to think about the bishop that was defending e6 in that crazy position where there were sacrifices on f3 for them. A bishop is said to be a tall pawn if it's not serving a useful function and is trapped behind its pawn, thus making it inactive. This kind of bishop takes on the persona of an overgrown pawn that sadly can turn into a queen if it reaches the end of the board. Bishops are usually strongest in open positions. The fewer pawns in the way of a bishop, the greater its scope. Every time you move a pawn, check to see how it affects the ability of your bishops. I read this the wrong way. Every time you move a pawn, check to see how it affects the activity of your bishops. Obviously, turning an open position into a closed one will have a serious effect on these pieces, so train yourself to always take the health and care of your bishops into account. While an active bishop might look good, a useful bishop trades style for substance and addresses the deeper needs, both dynamic and defensive of a position. Always think twice before placing your pawns on the same color. No, I have to read the previous sentence. What the fuck? While an active bishop might look good, as a useful bishop trades style for substance, okay, and addresses the deeper needs, okay. Always think twice before placing your pawns on the same color as your bishop. In general, you should only do this if your bishop can get outside the pawn chain, which will make it active, or if your bishop is proving useful, most likely as a defender inside the chain. If you have a tall pawn, try to free it by getting the pawns off its color or by getting it outside the pawn chain. Failing those things, you can also try and exchange it for an enemy minor piece, thus following our trade bad pieces for good ones rule. All the knowledge and good intentions in the world won't stop you from ending up with a tall pawn from time to time. If this occurs, you need to get your pawns off the color of your bishop, unblocking it, get your bishop outside the pawn chain, exchange the horrible bishop for an enemy bishop or knight. Or rook, alright. So, let's view this. Let's consider it done. And ladies and gentlemen, this is it. I just realized that today the recording was 2 hours and a half. And yesterday's recording was already an hour. So this video is going to be like 3 hours and a half. And what does this mean? That we are grinding. We are grinding this course. And now there's going to be 1, 2, Averbach, Jesus. So there's going to be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 tests, you know, and then we're gonna be over with this chapter because we made knights and bishops, and we're gonna actually go into bishops versus knights grudge match. And after we do that, there's gonna be rooks, files, ranks, and targets. I can't wait for that. And then, after these first chapters, that in my opinion are perhaps the most boring parts, there's gonna be actually something very interesting, which is more psychological perhaps things, like material, fear of giving up or taking material, very interesting. Overcoming the trap of I can't and I must, this is like really thinking process related. And then there's gonna be macho chess, the art of insistence, also gonna be very interesting. Then there's gonna be various states of chess consciousness, can't wait to read that. Target consciousness, can't wait to read that. 52 lines, that's crazy. Perhaps these are going to be exercises, puzzles, that's wild. And then part 6, statics versus dynamics, something that I really want to understand. Like how can you identify, perhaps in an objective way, when a position is static or dynamic? That's interesting. Then there's going to be space, best pawns, look at the amount, like this is a full, like these can all be full courses by themselves. Then there's going to be imbalances in the opening, very interesting. And then part 9, mixing imbalances. Perhaps it's going to be puzzles, I don't know. Okay. Well, what to say, guys? Thank you so much for watching this, and enjoy your chess.